Although I haven't got my laptop, so you do an intro. I will just nip and get that, but you intro it up, and I will talk when I'm back.
Well, I have a song for you.
You have a song for me?
Yeah. Well, so
Okay,
you,
fine.
so
I'll get my laptop in a minute then.
because well, basically what happened was I was sat down ready to go. You needed to get a drink, so there was a few minutes of downtime. So I very quickly wrote this for you, Chris. You ready?
Okay. Yeah.
He's a young boy who's disturbed, or is he here to save the world? Take the jet engine through time. It's portals and rabbits and teen angst and oh so 80s. Oh so 80s. Donnie Darko. I had this DVD. There you go.
So somewhere Richard Kelly is crying, but not because of the quality, but because he wishes he could do another director's cut and put that in there.
Imagine if the movie opened with that. Like he's cycling. Donnie's cycling home first night, literally the opening of the movie. And instead of whichever, I can't remember which 80 song, because he changes it between the director's cut and the no. It's like Echo and the Bunnymen, I think. Instead of that song as Donnie is cycling home, it's just me, but not even like a good recording of it, just like that me half asleep.
That take it out. And then presumably a shitload of text from a book on screen. We'll get to it. Roll the credits.
Hello and welcome to Rewind Reviews, the podcast where we take a look at movies from our past. I am joined, as always, by the wonderful Chris. Say hi, Chris.
Hi, Chris. Why have I taken to doing that every week like a bellend?
I don't know. Why have I taken to setting you up for it most weeks? There was one week when I said,
because
say hi, Chris,
I would,
and you just
I
went,
would argue,
hi, Dan.
yeah. I would argue I have no choice, but the way you're like, say, hi, Chris. I mean, it just literally, if I don't do the joke, it's weirder.
I agree. We take a look at movies from our past, generally speaking. We take turns in who chooses which movie. This week was my choice. I chose the sort of cult classic. Everyone seems to, in the UK at least, seems to have owned this on DVD at some point. Donnie Darko. Because I have a lot of thoughts on this movie, and I think I've always held certain positions on this movie. So, do we jump straight into history? Is that do we just go? Do you want to do hellos? Do we do banter? I suppose we did a song.
Nah, we did a song, and this podcast has the potential to get pretentious, long, and wanky anyway. So let's try and avoid that by just getting straight into it.
So, my history with the film is the same as many people's histories with the film, and Kevin Smith actually put this really, really well in the commentary on the director's cut DVD for this movie. When he said to Richard Kelly,
did you re-listen to that?
I did. Because
have you engaged with 3 versions of this movie then?
Yeah, theoretically. But I will say the third one, which is the commentary track, I watched / listened to while commuting.
Yeah, I wish I had time. Yeah, I was doing some tasks yesterday and put that version on as like a podcast, but I just didn't have time to finish it. So that makes sense.
So I basically I had a shift at work yesterday. It's like 45 minutes of travel each way. Ish, that's an hour and a half straight away just cut from that. Then there was only like 30 minutes left, which I just listened to once I got home. And potted about the house before I went to bed. So it was good. I got to listen to it all. But what Kevin Smith said, I thought was weirdly profound and a real bizarre maybe not even accidental insight into this movie's success. And it's worth noting this movie had no success in box office at all. It was an absolute mostly commercial failure until it hit DVD. When word of mouth, particularly in the UK, but also in the States, it just made the movie sell like crazy. It was a cheap DVD, then it was a movie. But Kevin Smith said that the genius of this movie is everyone who sees it, when they see it the first time, they feel like they've discovered it. And when you feel like you've discovered something, you feel an urge to share it. When you go see a blockbuster movie, you've not discovered that movie. It's all over the buses and billboards. You're not going out being like, oh my God, Chris, right? There's this movie. It's called Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I know it sounds insane, but you've got to see this movie. It's just not happening.
I mean, we did literally have that very discussion, but yeah, I take your point.
No, well, we had the discussion of the discussion we had was framed with, I know Ant-Man wasn't great, but you should see this one in the cinema. It's pretty good. That was the discussion we had. It wasn't like, Chris, you won't believe it. There's a talking raccoon.
You weren't introducing the movie to me.
No. I was saying it was worth seeing in the cinema. So I discovered this the way many people did, which is very much a word of mouth. Friend of a friend told someone that it was amazing. They saw it. They loved it. They told me. And I was like, how do I see this magical film? And because it was at a really, really low price point, it had sort of been released with very little expectation of success. And because the word of mouth thing happened kind of slowly, by the time people were telling each other to get this movie, it was like a £3 DVD. And no matter how, like, what of your age, you could afford it. You could, you know what I mean? It wasn't like a sort of 10, 15 quid brand new blockbuster purchase,
Which is why I think a lot of people also saw it, like, borrowed the DVD, gave it back, and then purchased it.
Right, that
to show it to someone else. It was like it was being sort of, pass it along. It was,
Yeah. It was an absolute virus of a film. And that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen if there's not something to it, right? The film, word of mouth happens when people really connect with something, right? Or really enjoy the thing. But a few years later, as a result of the success, understandably, the company that made the DVD and had let it get reduced in price before word of mouth really kicked in, went, hey, we can recoup some of the costs of this movie we made if we put it out again. But we don't really have an excuse to do that. It's been like 3 years. It's not been long enough. Do we just do a special edition with more bonus features? Someone somewhere had I think, a very smart idea in principle, maybe not so much in practice, but that will come to why, to reach out to the director and say, hey, we know you cut a bunch of material from this movie. Would you like to do a director's cut? And he went and sat, I think it was for 10 days with an editor, rejigged the movie to be closer to what he wanted, because he'd been forced originally by the studio to hit a certain time, the length of the movie for release. And he puts out the director's cut. And I go from guy who loved this movie, sharing it with friends, to coming to the conclusion that this movie is a massive accident. I don't want that to take away from the fact that it works in its initial incarnation. But I realize now that's just right place, right time, right edit, mostly down to luck. And the more I listen to Richard Kelly talk about this movie, the more convinced I am that this movie was a complete fluke.
And without...
Well, I just want to add the last sentence, which is, but I still don't think that changes the fact that a movie does not succeed the way this one did, like a virus, without it being worth people's time. So my history with this movie is the history everyone had with this movie. And I'm going to say now, having rewatched it, I'm just referring to the original cut here, I still think people should see this movie. I still think this movie is worth watching, and I'm still going to be recommending it, even having done an adult sort of rewatch. I've not seen this movie since I was much younger, and for anyone who's out there going, isn't this movie just like teen angst? Does that work as an adult? Yes, I think it still works as an adult. I think it's a really, really great movie. We'll get into the accidental side of its success later in more detail, and I'll break down why I feel the way I feel about it. But boy howdy, do I still recommend Donnie Darko. I had a great time watching this. So how about you, Chris? What's your history? Is it similar? And how are you feeling about it now?
Yeah. My history's the same as everyone's. A mate told me to watch it. I can't remember if I bought it and watched it. I think I borrowed it, I think I borrowed it off someone, watched it, and then bought it myself.
Yeah. When you said that, even I went, maybe I did that. Like, it seems, that seems really plausible. I was a bit of a DVD collector in my youth, so it wouldn't also surprise me that seeing it £3, if someone's recommended it, I might have just gone, because we had a shop next to HMV called Music Zone that sold everything at about 50% of the same prices as HMV. It was fucking great.
Well, they were right next to each other.
Yeah, basically. Well, it wasn't originally. It was originally. So in Stockport, where I grew up, it was on the other corner of town, like the other corner of the main town bit. So they weren't close, but then Music Zone, I guess, did quite well and could bought the spot pretty much next to.
We had, without us going in a massive tangent, but it's leading to a quick anecdote that's amusing. We had when I was really young, we had an R Price, a Virgin, and an MVC.
We never had a Virgin in Stockport. I don't know if we were just too poor for it or what. We had one in Manchester, in central Manchester, but I was never travelling that far.
No, that's fair. Yeah. And then our price, and obviously there were a lot more back in the day. There were a lot more videos in Woolworths and WH Smiths as well. But then our price and Virgin went, and we were just left with MVC for ages. And then HMV opened, and I was after little me Dan was after Mark Owens. He's a member of Take That. His third solo album. So I go in HMV. HMV's massive. HMV's like the place. Lots of fuss about HMV. Mm-hmm. They don't have it. I'm disappointed. I go up to MVC. I pick up the CD and I go up to the counter and they have it. And I go up to the counter and I go, I've just looked in because I'm thinking everyone in the shop gives a shit about like this sort of how one might put the other out of business, which is what happened. And then HMV itself went and then came back. But anyway, so I got to the counter and I go, I actually just looked for this in HMV and they didn't have it, but you guys did. And the guy behind the counter goes, yeah, man, yeah, we got a lot of good stuff. And then he looks down at my purchase and goes, and this Mark Owen CD.
I say bravo to that guy. That guy has comedic chops. I hope, and that man turned out to be Russell Howard.
I don't know where he is now. That memory, it's so funny, isn't it? How, do you know what I mean? That's not a he can't remember thing. That he's not retained that anecdote in any way, shape, or form, yet I remember it as clear as anything.
That is, and this is going to sound particularly wanky, but appropriate for this podcast. I think that is the joy of a moment like that, though, Chris. You might have a moment that's passable as an employee at a retail place. You might have a passing moment of fun with a customer that's just, you're entertaining yourself at this point. You're having a long shift. You'll probably never remember that interaction. You maybe you'll remember it for a week or two, and then it's gone. That guest, that customer, that patron of your business may remember that forever.
Yeah, for sure.
The power of good customer service. And I know some people are probably thinking, is that good customer service, mocking someone for their choices? I think if aimed tonally correctly, and you're let into the joke, you're not outside of the joke, you don't feel like you're being mocked. I think that's great.
Yeah,
I hope that guy's boss recognized what a good.
I think he was alone in the shop. I think it was just him. Like it was a Sunday morning, and HMV was taking a lot of business from MVC because MVC was the other end of town, and HMV was on most people's route to MVC.
Yeah, this is the problem, isn't it? So I think Music Zone originally built itself into like what had been a shoe shop that had closed down, and then they moved. But they were on the same strip as the HMV. In my memory, only a few doors down, but now I'm wondering if maybe I've like conflated that slightly because that was my route.
And this is my fault, but I just love how we were like, right, let's go straight into it. So we could let's just try not to go too long, and now we're listing the shops that used to sell
the DVD anyway. We're referring to. I just remember that £3 sticker being such an enticing thing.
Yeah, and this was definitely a film, like you say, that you could pick up cheap. And yeah, I'm pretty sure a friend was like, let's watch Donnie Darko. watched it, really enjoyed it, and then got it. I hadn't seen the director's cut. I remember talking to you about the director's cut and knowing that the director's cut explained things more. I absolutely also recommend this movie, and actually think that like this is very comparable, but this comes out trumps to what happened with Good Will Hunting. You've got an esteemed, and whether, you know, like with critics or whether like the general osmosis praise this film, Good Will Hunting and Donnie Darko are both films that film nerds of our generation got wanky and pretentious about and claimed they were amazing. And I'm not saying neither film is amazing, but I think what we found when watching Good Will Hunting was we were like, oh, it's not as faultless as I thought it was. Like it's not as smooth as I thought it was.
Right.
It's not quite the I didn't walk out of Good Will Hunting with the same feelings. Actually, Donnie Darko, I don't think you necessarily get the same reaction you did when you were younger, but you actually get almost a better one. You get a more in-depth one. You get a more... So, for example, my big thing as a kid was, I loved that. I'm not sure I really get it. I'm not sure I understand what happened. My thing as an adult is, for the original cut, is still... I'm not. I know what happened, but I don't know the hows. I don't know all the nuances. But that doesn't matter. I'm not meant to, because I'm concentrating on time travel. Someone else could watch this film and view it as a love story. Someone else could watch this film and think it's a message about mental health and potentially suicide. Like, there's so many facets to this film. And as an adult, you watch it and go, oh, it doesn't matter what happened. It doesn't matter what I take from it. It matters what each individual person watching it takes from it, and I think it creates something different in you, and it holds up. Truthfully, it pains me to say it, because I still think, and I think I was more. We were both very positive about Good Will Hunting. I think I was slightly more positive, but I think both of us definitely felt that we didn't come out going categorically a masterpiece. Great. But it didn't give us the feeling of when we were younger. Yeah, I think Donnie Darko... It was
more flawed than we had hoped it would be on rewatch.
Yes. I don't think that's the case with Donnie Darko. I think you get a slightly different interaction with it, or at least I did. But I don't think you get that sense of, oh, that wasn't what I thought it was. Actually, in the case of Donnie Darko, it's kind of more than I thought it was. Like,
yeah, I think it's really interesting. So, Patrick H. Willems, who's a YouTuber that I'm very fond of, did a video recently that he called the Vibes movie, or a tenet and a celebration of vibes movies is the exact title, and he sort of coins this term vibe movies to refer to what he calls cool movies about men in suits doing cool shit. And he's talking mostly about Tenet and Michael Mann's Miami Vice movie and a bunch of other movies that he thinks kind of fits into this genre that's a bit indefinable. And they're movies where the plot doesn't really matter. You've got to kind of feel it. The details are almost irrelevant. It's about, do you understand emotionally where the character is right now? Do you understand physically what the goal is right now? Because if you understand those two things, that's all you need to know. The rest is just dressing. And not all movies can get away with this, but there's a certain kind of movie that does. And then he talks about, he references and says, well, I'm talking about a really specific, very zeroed in on a very specific sub-genre of movie. There's a wider thing that fits this same thing, and he refers to them as kind of tone poems. You know, movies that are all about the tone and the vibe and the feeling that it gives you rather than the actual plot. And I think what's fascinating about Donnie Darko, rewatching it, is how much it made me think of that Patrick H. Willems video as I was watching it. Because it's like, you're not really always following Donnie Darko in the very physical, practical, okay, what exactly is happening right now sense of the word. But you can always, when watching this movie, track where the character is, what his general arc is across the movie, and what the goal is. Those three things are very clear, in my opinion. And I think even if that third one, the goal, is a bit muddled up because it's connected to the plot stuff, it will become clear to you right at the end of the movie. And that's probably a first watch experience feeling. I don't think you get that on subsequent watches because you know the ending. And it was really, I don't know, there was something about, I recommend anyone go watch that video. In fact, just anything from Patrick H. Willems in general. But I thought his Tenet and A Celebration of Vibes movies video was really interesting. Because it was just being able to appreciate a film that's focus was different. It wasn't, different movies are doing different things with intention. He talked about how in Tenet, the character's name is the protagonist. He calls himself the protagonist. In the credits, he's listed as the protagonist. And Patrick H. Willems says, this doesn't happen by accident. Nolan didn't wake up late that day when he had to choose the name for his character. He deliberately chose that and made it was in the credits. It was, it's what the character refers to himself as throughout the movie. It's a deliberate choice, And I feel like what's interesting about Donnie Darko is I'm not so sure its position as a vibes movie or a tone poem is intentional. But that doesn't change the fact that I think it strongly works as that. It is a sort of masterpiece of like the unsaid. It's like it's so open to interpretation, this movie, I think, in its original theatrical form. And I find, I find the lack of answers, that ambiguity is a really key word here, to be what makes this film work so well. And that's why the director's cut is so eye-opening, because it teaches you two things. One, what's actually happening in the movie, really didactically spelled out in plain English, which sort of takes some of the magic out, for one. But also, for two, I think just goes to show that the director kind of made the movie the way it was in the edit because he was forced to hit a number, and not because that's actually how he would have had the movie go. And I really wonder, in a world where the studio went, make it whatever length you want to start with, is Donnie Darko Donnie Darko?
Yeah, I agree with all that. One quick side note. For anyone that listened to the last podcast, I genuinely think my neighbours are waiting until it sounds like I'm doing a podcast and then they start drilling. So, as per last time, if you could hear that. Oh, hold on a sec, Jason. Oh, someone cutting the grass. Oh, and you shut the window. That's why it stopped. It's all right, guys. Someone cutting the grass. Who's cutting the grass? Someone cut the grass earlier. Is everyone cutting their grass but us? It looks like the fucking jungle in our garden. A weed whacker. They've cut the grass, now they're weed whacking, Dan. We've solved it. Thank you for shutting the window. I'm going to boil, but hopefully people won't hear that. Sorry for that slight
people
detour,
might
Dan.
hear you boiling. There might be like a faint. There might be a faint whistle as you start to boil, like a kettle.
I mean, you know me, mate. When I get warm, I whistle. So there's every possibility to hear that. I think as well. We talked about and I think I realized watching the director's cut how much actually, because we said we don't want to necessarily spend the whole thing comparing or reviewing both, but actually I think you can talk about. You truly get, as you've just said, it's an eye-opening experience into the successes of the theatrical cut when you see the director's cut. Because what I love so much about the theatrical cut is there are pieces that are there, but it's just like the director's cut the director's cut is giving you answers that you have more questions about, and actually the answers take away some of the magic. And that beauty, what I was talking about, of the film can be different things to different people, that's less applicable to the director's cut. And also the director's cut, it feels like, in a way, it almost doesn't feel like a director's cut. You take Blade Runner, the final cut. Blade Runner, the final cut, absolutely feels like a movie that's been recreated using the existing stuff and kind of little supplementary material. The director's cut, because a lot of it is pages of the book, and a lot of it is these images that have been added to certain sequences, it almost feels like that it almost wasn't the intention. And do you know what I mean? It's adding something that was supplementary that wasn't even there to begin with. It feels like Zack Snyder's Justice League. Everyone always goes on about it like, oh, this is the movie we should have got. Da, da, da. That's not the movie we would have got. That was our big review of Zack Snyder's Justice League. It's like, you can love it. Like, fine. I think, I enjoyed it more than Dan. I think it's certainly better than the theatrical cut. But it is categorically, you cannot say, see, Snyder should never have been let go or shouldn't have walked away or whatever happened there. Because this would have been amazing. That's not what we would have seen. DC were not going to, Warner Brothers were not going to release a 4-hour movie into the cinemas.
Correct.
That's not what we would have got. It also plays as a 4-hour movie. It doesn't play as 2 parts put together. So there's not like you could have chopped it in the middle and done a part 1, part 2 as originally intended. That's not what we would have got. And the director's cut feels like that. It's not. It
feels like a work print. It feels like a work print. And it feels like the assembly cut of a movie before they then tighten it. And you can feel that when watching it.
It takes away that magic of interpretation. And I think what's interesting about that is I'm a plot guy, right? I like to know, and we're pretty soon now, because obviously we both clearly, very much recommend this film. Recommend checking out the theatrical cut if you haven't. Pause, go
surprise.
Away, come back. Yeah. Really, really, really holds up.
I genuinely thought I was going to discover it didn't really function as an adult, as a person who's spent years now sort of analysing media and stuff. I thought versus my sort of younger teenage self, who was very susceptible to shiny indie film, because that's the other thing. This movie is like an introduction for a lot of people to indie cinema. A lot of people see this movie and then they dug out. Then they fell down a rabbit hole of like these cheap DVDs that were actually great indie movies. Things like Eternal Sunshine, which I actually don't personally care for, but understand a lot of people love that movie. Movies that are sort of like those mid-tier to low-tier sort of like budget things, not the blockbusters. Donnie Darko, for a lot of people, opened up a window to a whole side of cinema that they were not previously experiencing. Basically, movies that weren't advertised to them on the sides of buses.
And look, it's worth saying, if you like your movies where everything is answered, and fair enough if you do, then maybe it might not be for you. But chances are you don't necessarily like that genre that Dan's just described anyway. Maybe.
Yeah, but I also feel like with Donnie Darko teaches you to not want the answers. The theatrical film.
I completely agree.
I think there is some real truth to that this movie lives on its ambiguity, because what I think has happened, because he did have an internal logic to it, and this is why. So there's another YouTube video I saw a few days ago about this movie, and it's a reasonably new video, and I actually recommend people check it out. It was it's a very small British YouTuber. What was it called? Donnie Darko. Let me see if I can find the video. But basically, his video was about The Emperor's New Clothes. And how everyone thought this movie was this genius masterpiece and would debate it. And it's from a YouTube channel called I'm Making a Movie. And it's called... it's literally just gone off my screen, which is very frustrating. The Cinematic Emperor's New Clothes, Donnie Darko, a review, right? And this guy posits the theory that the movie seemed like this genius masterpiece, but actually it was just sort of like, Richard Kelly just got lucky and it just didn't know what he was doing necessarily, and it all kind of came together in a way that he didn't really. His actual answers to these mysteries, they weren't that deep. The movie's kind of shallow, it turns out, when you actually know what he meant it to be about, and everyone filled in the gaps. And there's truth to that, massive truth to that. But I do recommend you check out that video because it is still a really good video. He's only got 87 views, bless him. Go check it out. The Cinematic Emperor's New Clothes, Donnie Darko review from I'm Making a Movie, which is a YouTube channel. Go give him a go. It's a really good video, even if it comes from quite a cynical place. But I agree with a lot of what's said in the video. The caveat is that I think what ends up happening with Donnie Darko is because it sells you that there is a vision. You believe the choices are deliberate. Whether that's true or not, and, based on the director's cut and the commentary, sadly, I don't think it is, but just on the basis of theatrical cut Donnie Darko, the director has put together a movie that successfully earns your trust to go with it, regardless of whether you're a plot guy. And it's structured in a way that's coherent enough that you can quite easily put together answers that make sense to you and imply what you want from it, infer from what you want from it. So in the director's cut, there's more of a hint of it being science fiction than magic. It's a lot more technology based, the answers to the questions. But I think that spoils it somewhat, because I think you can have that interpretation if you want when you watch the theatrical cut, but you can also have a different interpretation when you watch the theatrical cut. So I think even if you're the sort of person who likes plot and likes it to make sense, I think the movie as it stands can be made sense of and pulled together in a way that makes sense, that works for you plot wise, if you're the kind of guy that really cares about that.
But also so I'll give my, so let's go spoilers now, right? So we absolutely recommend the movie.
Yes.
Specifically the theatrical cut. We definitely recommend it. It absolutely holds up. It's fantastic.
Only dive into the director's cut if you're interested in the some of the stuff we're talking about now, in terms of analysing the differences between the two films and how one might kind of demonstrate lack of intent by the director to achieve what he achieved with the first one. It is a fascinating experience to watch both, for sure.
So one thing that captured my imagination as a kid about this movie, we're going full spoilers now. I'm literally going to be talking about the ending. So full on spoilers. If you've not seen it, last chance, go away, see it, etc. So I actually I don't think it's needed, but I like the logic. I like the tangent universes and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Now, but what captured my imagination as a kid was how does he travel back? Like, my interpretation is he goes back in time, he reverses it, he changes things, etc. And a literal plot. I'm a plot guy. A literal logic. How? And I think an example of how the director's cut gives you too much, but also then not enough, is in the director's cut. You know, it's named Tangent Universe. We talk about stuff going through via artifacts, etc. So it's like, you're literally, it makes you go, okay, is he going to drive that car into a wormhole? Which I think is quite a fun interpretation of how he might do it. I'm glad it's not showed in either. But do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, the second cut is, it's kind of going, well, we'll give you some answers, but we'll still make you think a bit. And it's like, well, no, because now you've given me so many answers that you're just going to need to fill in the blanks all the way. Like, do you know what I mean? And completely ruin the movie.
And the reason it's partial answers is because he never thought it through. There are points in his commentary with Kevin Smith where Kevin Smith calls him out. He does have this happens multiple times on him not knowing the answer. It's a fascinating listen, that commentary. It's so good. And at one point, Kevin Smith's like, wait, the whole town were helping him the whole time? He's like, yeah, sort of. He's like, nah, I don't like it. Kevin Smith's just like shooting it down. He's like, nah, I don't vibe with that. I don't like it. That's not my Donnie Darko. Like, he's really, he's so good. It's a great commentary track because Kevin Smith just does not give a shit.
And it's that period of Kevin Smith. You get those two doing that commentary track now, and Kevin Smith would just be like, "Oh yeah, no, if that's what you want to do, it's amazing. Like, it's your vision, man. You got to do what you know what I mean." But Kevin Smith then is like calling him out on bullshit for sure.
100%. And I think that's what it is. It's like, I think the movie, in script form and in its completed form, had the director just had the freedom to do the movie he wanted, would have been a frustrating experience. It would have been half answers that only raise more questions, and we can talk about a specific example, which is your end, which is the ending, which is the jet engine, right? Let's talk about the jet engine for just a second, because this is one of those moments where in the theatrical cut you get away with it, because what happens in the theatrical cut is he ends up back in the room, the jet engine falls on him, and you just go, so there's a thing happening that I don't understand here. But I understand what the outcome is, which is that he has saved everyone by sacrificing himself. I understand the character.
And sorry to interrupt you, but in the theatrical cut, just because it links to what I was saying before, in the theatrical cut, maybe he's just psychologically experienced this other world. Sure. And so actually it's reversing because he's going back to his consciousness in that moment. Maybe in the theatrical cut, it's about Frank, and it's about, well, actually Frank puts him back, or maybe it's literally time travel and he does do some wormhole shit. It can be anything. Right. In the director's cut, it's tangent universe, and you go, well, okay, well, how did you send yourself back? But do continue.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the problem. Is like, wait, so then in the director's cut, Richard Kelly gets to put in the stuff that his interpretation was the answers he wanted to give, which is, it's essentially a tangent universe separated but through time. Like, it's like the branches of a tree is how he describes it in the commentary. So the trunk is the main timeline, and this breaks off from it, but eventually that branch will die and break off. And Donnie has to take the artifact back to the main universe, or it all collapses. So everyone's lives are at stake. And that's all fine, I guess, as an answer. But then it raises the question of, okay, well, what? So let's just say that in the cut between Donnie on the cliff looking at the plane and the portal over the water, and Donnie in his bedroom, let's just say between that, he fucking Supermaned. Because he talks a lot in the director's commentary about him having superpowers, super strength, telekinesis, all this stuff. So Donnie's a superhero. Fine, okay, sure. It's not in your movie, but let's go with that. The only hints to it in the movie are the fact that he gets the axe into the solid statue, and they go, "How is that even possible?" But okay, fine. He's got super strength. I don't care. So let's just say we go with Richard Kelly's interpretation of this. The question becomes, where did the original jet engine come from? Donnie brings that one back with him. Where's the jet engine that falls in the original timeline when Donnie is not in bed, at the start of the tangent universe, at the moment the universe breaks off? Who brings that jet engine back? It just immediately falls apart. So any element of this movie, once you start actually trying to make full-on explanations based on the crumbs you're given in the director's cut, it just falls apart completely.
And it also goes, you just go, there's like, and I don't mean to, Richard Kelly wrote it, and it's, a lot of what he's done is, and a lot of the decisions, did he write it actually? Did he write and direct? Yeah. And a lot of the decisions are genius, but like, you kind of go, come on, dude, you know that's not, and maybe he doesn't mean this, but it's like, well, you didn't, even when you probably, even if you wanted to do a little bit of reshooting, had the power to, you still didn't shoot Jake Gyllenhaal I can't say his name, apologies.
You nailed it. I think you literally said it perfectly, and then doubted yourself. Jake Gyllenhaal.
Oh, okay. You didn't film Jake Gyllenhaal Supermaning up to the sky, grabbing the engine and flying into a vortex for a reason, my friend. Like, if that's the explanation, there's a reason you didn't put it in the fucking movie.
Right.
I'll give you. Sorry, go on.
No, you go. Yeah.
I'll give you an example where, and this again is that, and I know we are talking a lot about the commentary, the director's cut, but it's because it highlights how beautiful and wonderful the film is. Because I really appreciated on this watch that whole, exactly what we've said, the fact that it's so open to interpretation is the genius part. Because here's an example where, for me, something in the director's cut worked, and then I saw a comment and went, for that person, the director's cut won't work. So something in the director's cut that didn't work thematically but made me go, oh, I understand that more, and now that makes sense, was the notion of, if anyone that died or was deeply affected in the tangent universe will remember it, will have more chance of remembering it in the primary universe. So I was like, oh, that's why the Frank is so upset in that Mad World montage where we're panning past everyone. Mm-hmm. That's why, potentially, because there was obviously there's challenges with the Patrick Swayze thing actually in the director's cut, because it's like, did he no longer get caught then? That's an uncomfortable.
Well, that's in both cuts.
That's in both.
Yeah, both cuts have that problem.
But maybe he's died or had drama, or because he's crying and remembering, and Gretchen at the end with the wave, and this notion that the fact that they went through such trauma and died in the Tangent universe is why they're more aware of what's happened than most. And I was like, oh, that frames that a bit more for me and puts that into context a bit more. That's
fascinating.
And I didn't mind that. But then I read a comment about how for the person commenting...
I have a feeling, Chris, you're about to literally the point I was going to make when we sort of had that moment where we were like, oh, no, do you go? I think you're about to read the comment that was what I was about to talk about. But please do. That's very interesting. Go on.
It's a comment. It was a comment about how for them the movie was an analogy in talking about suicide, and that
okay, that is different to what I was going to say. Okay, my bad.
Okay, so I'd love to hear yours as well. So how basically this person's interpretation was that the ending is about how often when people commit suicide, they think they're making everyone else's lives better and easier because they're not going to be there. But what actually happens is they make their life a lot harder. And they were talking about how Donnie is laughing and smiling because he's making the choice to, in his head, save the day. But then when you see the pain that his family are in, and the the trauma that's caused, you realise that actually that hasn't happened with that. And obviously that's one person's comment, and I may even be miscommunicating their comment, but and right. Obviously suicide as a whole is a huge. It has a lot of nuances and different angles. That's not necessarily there's this discussion about that topic. Obviously, I'm just saying I appreciate that that's not a black and white view on suicide, nor should it be. And I might even be misquoting the comment. But as an idea, if that interpretation or similar interpretations is your interpretation, then actually everyone in the town reacting lends itself to that. Everyone in the town, even though they may not even know yet about Donnie's death, but the seeing the town and seeing the hurt and confusion from everyone fits into that interpretation of the film quite well. And if you answer it as, oh no, well it's because they remember what happened in the other universe, it takes away from that interpretation of the film. So whilst that extra information in the director's commentary enhanced my interpretation of that moment, actually for someone else, I thought that comment was a good example potentially of how for someone else it takes away from their interpretation, which is why, again, the beauty of the film is it's up for interpretation. Where did you think I was going?
For me, I thought outright explaining that people who've experienced things in the Tangent universe, they'll get flashes, dreams, that there'll be echoes of what happened in the Tangent universe for those who were close to it. That physical explanation was so unnecessary to me because that is what I'd interpreted from the original cut anyway, but it was subtler. So I watched the original cut. One of my favorite things about the movie when I was younger and I was, interested in the movie, looking up the movie online, reading theories, because there was a lot of that. I really liked reading people's thoughts on this, but I really liked when whether I spotted it and couldn't make sense of it and then read a comment about it, or whether I read a comment about it and it made sense to me, when someone was like, Frank touches his eye, he's briefly remembering being shot there. And I was like, oh, well, in that case, let's think about all these people and their reactions in that moment. Because if Frank is having some sort of echo, distant, dreamlike memory of a life not led, because that Tangent universe collapsed, what else did other people... What else... was Patrick Swayze crying because of the hurt he causes on a daily basis because he's a monster and he can't live with himself? Or is he crying because he's just woken up from a dream where he got caught and exposed? Is that what he's upset for? Is the reason Gretchen waves at Donnie's mum because they've got a weird sense of deja vu? They know each other.
And the girl who gets bullied and has the book with his name on,
Sharita Chan,
is Is she in love with him, and she's smiling because she's just thinking about him? And in the Tangent universe, she notices something's not right about him, and that's thrown her off. Or is it more that actually in the Tangent universe, she had a sense something was wrong, and now that thing has been fixed, and that's why she's smiling? There's, you could do a version of that with every character, as you've just done with Patrick Swayze's, and done with the girl getting bullied, and that's amazing. That's so fun and cool.
But that is only in the theatrical.
yeah. Because in the directors, it's. Oh yeah, no, it's Tangent Universe, so they can remember shit. Yeah, okay, cool,
great. And I think what's really cool about this movie, for me as well, what it was, so those pages of that book that end up on screen in the director's cut, the director's cut. Two things about those that will really put a cap on this theatrical versus director's cut intent versus accident discussion. I think those pages were released online following the movie's release. On the website, you could find those pages of the book, and I remember digging those out and reading those pages before the director's cut ever existed. I was at college. We had a lunch break. We were in the room with the computers and internet access, and I remember I was just like, "Oh yeah, I wanted to look this up." And I looked them up, and we read through them. We tried to make sense of them, and we were like, "Oh, so I guess it really is a time travel thing. It's really this." But like, there still felt like there was tons of room because these pages were sort of supplemental, and you never really knew if "quote unquote" Roberta Sparrow's book, Grandma Death's book, was real or not. There was still so much that left to the imagination. By having the pages released as supplemental material through certain DVD releases, but mostly on the internet, you could read them and go, well, we don't know if her book is legit. We don't know if her book is the real explanation of what's happening. But I think when you do the director's cut, the choice to put them on screen physically, showing your workings, showing that you're saying this is it. You're saying this is real. You're not leaving it open to interpretation anymore, because there's a sense of discovery of going on the website and digging out the pages yourself. That's I'm finding this out because I'm interested in learning more about the world. There's no more importance placed on it within the hour and 50 odd minutes of the first film.
But it's also the laziest version of that concept.
Right.
Like, why not scenes of he's reading those paragraphs? If you're going to do that, and I don't, as is very clear, neither of us think they should. Why not scenes of him reading them out to Gretchen?
I can answer that question, but do you want to? Do you want to know the answer?
Yeah, I'll just finish. But let me just finish. Yeah. I'm sure there is an answer, but let me get the frustration out of if scenes of him reading the book to Gretchen and her kind of going with it, and you realise that how intellectually on the same level they are, and it enhances their love story. Scenes of him reading it out to his dad, and his dad. Oh, sorry, I hit something. I'm getting passionate. Apologies. So not violently. I tapped a spare pair of headphones. Scenes of him reading it out to his dad, and his dad doesn't really care or doesn't really understand it, but he's trying so hard because he's just trying to connect with his son, and he's glad he's speaking to him. So there's so many character things you could do to get those pages and that exposition into the film.
Do you want to know
why are they on the screen? Yeah,
because not why they're on the screen, but why didn't he do that? The thing you're describing, because the pages didn't exist when he filmed the movie.
What? So then he didn't really know, and then he changed it up. What?
So he multiple times in the commentary confirms that the pages were written and drawn by him during the editing of the film, when he himself was trying to make sense of it and piece it together.
But if he must.
So
have
the
had
movie
the
is shot at the point he's doing that.
Did he talk in the commentary about? So if that's the case, surely at one point, it was half finished in his head, but he decided to make it anyway. That implies that during the making of the movie, Jake was saying, "Hey, what's all this about, Richard?" And Richard was saying, "Well, it could be this, it could be that. It's open to interpretation."
Correct.
Why did he suddenly? I don't know why there was that sudden change then to answer.
Because he was editing the movie and he was having to make it make sense on screen.
Yeah.
So he built an explanation himself into the story. And some of it ends up feeling really coherent. Like, he talks about, you know, the person who saves the world will have the power to bring, you know, to create fire and water. And of course, throughout the movie, we see Donnie flood the school and burn down the pedophile's house. So, you know, he's written them after the fact to try and make sense of the movie for himself. And he wrote them during the editing process. And I think that's why, because they didn't film any scenes with Donnie talking through those pages, because those pages didn't exist. And I think what's really interesting is, you know, was he just on set going, oh, it's open to interpretation? Yeah, I think so, because one of the pieces of trivia, Chris, is at the wrap party for this film, Seth Rogen and Jake Gyllenhaal both agreed they had no idea what the movie was about. And this is why that video that I mentioned earlier is so interesting. That this movie really is sort of like the Emperor's New Clothes situation, where it's a lot of people thought it was this really smart, well thought out, intricate masterpiece of like of sort of like open to interpretation, like a subtle film with a lot of really understated themes that if you really think about it, it'll open up a whole world in your mind. And actually, I stand by that, like many things, this movie was an accident. And that's why I said this discussion about those pages would be a bit of a cap to that discussion, because I don't think there is any more proof you need that Richard Kelly really didn't know what he's doing and this movie really is a happy accident than the fact those pages were written during the editing of the movie.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I tell you before because I've got a subject that takes us away from.
I've got some general thoughts about the film in general now, so that we can get off this particular topic. But
let me tell you one small thing that the director's cut does that I'm like, oh, that makes more sense, and that's a good decision. And I think it is. It isn't even up for interpretation. I think categorically, it's a moment where it's like the director's cut got that right. You ready for it?
Go on. Yeah.
I like the fact that. That Donnie goes in, starts a conversation with Drew Barrymore's character, and then Drew Barrymore's character says, the school's getting rid of me, I'm being fired. Whereas in the theatrical, it just cuts to them talking, and he's like, so what are you going to do now? And I'm like, are these two close? Like, do they have... Why are they on their own? Why is she... she's already told, like, it's so odd. Like, it wouldn't be out of character so much with her boyfriend, with the science guy, because we've seen them interact on their own and all that sort of stuff. But I was in the theatrical cut, I was just a bit like, oh, do these two have, like, a friendship? Like, what's going on there? So I did like the director's cut for adding more context to that scene.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of moments like that where, like, the scene is longer, and you understand a bit more why these two people are talking. And there's a couple of moments like that where the director's cut benefits from having a few extra minutes of time just to sort of smooth out little tiny inconsistencies like that. Yeah, 100%. And I resent, you're referring to everyone's second favourite doctor from ER as the science guy. That's John Carter, my friend. That's Noah Wiley. Let's
he's great, man. How like this wasn't this was my jumping on. I was specifically going to focus in on Jake, but the cast in general are fucking fantastic in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot tell you enough, Chris, how much every time I watch this movie, I walk away going, "Fuck me, is Mary McDonnell good in this movie?" Like she's on another level to everyone else in this movie. Look, this is a great cast. Maggie and Jake Gyllenhaal, obviously famously good actors. Even Frank is played by James Duval. Like, Patrick Swayze is Jim Cunningham, the late great Patrick Swayze. This is a stacked movie cast-wise, right? Jenna Malone playing Gretchen, she's great in that role. She's so, again, it's understated and charming. And obviously, I've not even mentioned fucking Drew Barrymore is in this movie yet. But
Drew Barrymore's phenomenal in it as well. I think it's some of her best work.
And with all that in mind, Mary McDonnell still blows every fucking one of them out of the water every single time I watch this movie. I cannot get my head around it. It is such an incredible, understated performance where she says so much by doing so little in every single scene. And the choice at the end to just be miserably smoking and staring into the distance instead of, like, weeping, like, about her
So
past.
To clarify for those that don't know, she plays the mum.
Sorry, yes, I didn't clarify. Did I? Apologies. Yes, so she plays Rose Darko, who is Donnie's mum. But her choice at the end to not be like openly weeping, but to just be so obscenely shell shocked. That sad wave. It's just. Oh, it's so good. And the little pause she gives when she hears Donnie call her a bitch through the door. The way she interacts with Eddie Darko, the husband, played by Holmes Osborne, who's also very good in this movie. And I have got the IMDb up in front of me if you're wondering how quickly I found Holmes Osborne's name. He's a very wonderful actor, but his name was not in my brain until 30 seconds ago. I've got to be honest. As good as he is in this movie, and again, very charming and likable, as the whole cast are. But I cannot tell you, Chris, how much it hits me every single time I watch this movie. What a different fucking planet she's operating on in this film. I don't understand it. It's so good. Every scene she's in, she's the most captivating thing in the scene, and that is and Jake Gyllenhaal is giving an absolute a career starting performance. Like, this is the performance that made Jake Gyllenhaal, and it's so good. But yeah. Everyone is getting acted off the screen by Mary McDonnell in this movie. I don't care. It's true. Come at me, bro.
Well, let's talk about Jake Gyllenhaal as well, though, because I think I agree with you. But I think Jake is up there as well in terms of the performances, because how hard is it? Especially, I don't know if you have to hand how old he was when the film was made, but especially for a young actor. To do the nuances, like 19. How many times have you sat in school? And he's obviously probably a bit older than.
So he was 19 playing for 16. Maggie
19,
and Maggie Gyllenhaal was 23 playing for 19.
How many times, Dan, did you sit in sixth form or college and watch shoddy mates doing shoddy made-up drama productions and workshops or whatever about things like, mental illness and anxiety and it's referred to in the film. He's misdiagnosed or correctly diagnosed, depending on your interpretation. Is it schizophrenic or
schizophrenia?
Schizophrenia. How many times have you seen fucking appalling acting representing those things? And Jake he plays it beautifully. And he's also got to be different things in different moments. You know what I mean? He's got to be. It's in the director's cut. It's a cut scene. There's a really lovely scene between him and his dad, and in that scene, he's a son. He's a young boy. In other scenes with Gretchen, he's got to be charming and romantic. And in scenes with his sisters, he's got to be an irritating brother. And he's doing all of it perfectly and feels consistently the same character throughout all of it.
Yeah.
I think he's wonderful in this movie.
He did an interesting thing. Apparently, he because it's set in the 80s in the area that Richard Kelly grew up, and Richard Kelly has admitted to cribbing from his own life in many, in some ways, like that whole fear and. Was it Fear and Love? The Fear and Love line and that exercise? He said they literally made him do that in high school. So he borrowed from his own life quite liberally. As a result, Jake Gyllenhaal took that to mean that Donnie was in some way based on him. So Jake Gyllenhaal was across the first 2/3 of the production, just secretly watching Richard Kelly and copying him, and basing his movements and his behaviors on Richard Kelly. And apparently, Richard Kelly, he told him 2/3 of the way through, and Richard Kelly really kind of wished he hadn't said it, because he was then a lot more self-conscious about what he was doing around Jake Gyllenhaal, which I think is quite funny. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting choice as well for a young actor to sort of make the leap that there's some of the author in the material and decide to sort of base some of the performance on him. It is a surprisingly wily move to sort of go, what, he's not said this, but this is my reading of it, and I'm going to start building some of that into it. It shows a real sense of craft and of wanting to sort of bring something that felt authentic to the character, and I do think there is an authenticity to Donnie that very few actors could have brought. There was some alternate casting. Jake was not first choice for Donnie. and how lucky they were they ended up with him, and I feel like Richard Kelly feels that too. Would you, if you're happy to move on from cast, well, we just talk about some of the others. Obviously, Maggie Gyllenhaal's great. Perfect casting for a sister. She plays that great, and obviously probably played a little bit with her, alongside her own, experiences growing up with. It must be easy to play bratty sister to your actual sibling. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to diminish her performance in this film, because she's great in this movie. But obviously, yes, it's, that will have given her a leg up, to say the least. Patrick Swayze is great as our slimy secret kitty dungeon owner, Jim Cunningham.
He's doing that amazing thing where you believe both. You believe that he is that person, and you also believe why some people, like the school teacher, can't see he's that person. He achieves both beautifully. Often when we've talked about this before, when someone's got a secret, sometimes the appalling performance of that is you sit there and go, how do the characters not know he's lying? Like, he's clearly lying. His performance in this, it can read both ways, and the fact that it reads both ways is really subtle in the wider scope of the movie, but so effective and impactful within it.
Yeah, 100%. And then just to widen out some of the other cast members that haven't gotten a shout out yet, like Jalene Purdy as Charita Chen, so sort of lovable and charming and sad and designed to be. It's sad that she gets bullied so much, and the way she sells it is such a kind spirit that's just being beaten down by that character is doing a lot more than that character will be doing in any other movie. That character is just victim in another movie, but the way that it's both written, and again, I also don't want to undersell that. Obviously, Richard Curry wrote this movie. The fact it works as strongly as it does in many ways is due to accidental circumstances, being forced to chop the movie down. Kind of ended up hiding that in terms of the wider mythology, he didn't really have a grasp on what was going on, and by paring it down, it became this great open to interpretation, ambiguous piece. But it's also worth adding that his character work in this movie, the actual scenes, the dialogue, a lot of the big ideas, they're all from him, and they're brilliant. Is the movie an in-depth look at schizophrenia? No. If you're looking for that, then this is a very shallow movie. Is it a movie exploring time travel? Not really. It's all very shallow, the way that they explore time travel. But it works because he's done a really good job making you invest in the people. And Charita Chen's a perfect example of that. A much lazier movie would have had that character be bullied and bullied for just being there to be the victim at school, right? She's had a swirly, she's been kicked over in class. Showing her at the talent show, doing her performance, and showing what spirit she has in spite of a class of people that bully her, that ignore her culture and are rude to her, and in all the ways that we've talked about. It just was a brilliant writing choice. Just that is a person who understands how to tell stories about people, right? The Donnie's speech to Jim Cunningham. There isn't a kid alive that didn't want to, speak truth to power during their high school years. Where some fucking teacher that had a fucking hard on for the power, was sort of, always acting like these kids didn't know what the fuck they were talking about and didn't treat the kids like human beings. And I cannot tell you how many teachers I wanted to call the fucking Antichrist, right? To write that into the script the way he did is not an accident. That is a man who understands exactly the time and place in which he's writing about and the people in which. So that's why I don't 100% prescribe to the Emperor's New Clothes thing. I do think a lot of what makes this movie the hit it is an accident, but I also think there's a huge amount of really, really clever writing happening here too. And I don't want to dismiss that's happening alongside. But getting back to the cast, Drew Barrymore obviously is wonderful, and then the last person I want to give credit to, and I'm trying to find her name, and it's eluding me right now, but it's Chris. Sometimes I doubt your commitment to sparkle motion. What's that actress's name? Is it Beth Grant? Is this her? Kitty
Why are you looking it up?
I've got it. It's Beth Grant. She is fucking incredible in this movie. So good as this sort of like overly conservative, like, oh, but think of the children sort of person who's like susceptible to like fucking these insane like theories, and like the fact that when they literally prove that guy was like a running a kiddie dungeon or whatever they call it, she's like, it must be a conspiracy. So good. Again, both in the writing, that's very clever. That's happening today. That's extremely relevant to today when people who are that way inclined, faced with the realization their heroes are actually monsters, just ignoring that outright and pretending it's a conspiracy theory. That sounds very familiar to me. But her performance is so damn good. You hate that character. When she challenges Donnie Darko's mum on her motherhood, you just want to kick her in the teeth. That's hard to do. So yeah, carry on, Chris. Sorry, I've talked for a long time now.
I will say I'm trying to get the other. We really, literally could name everyone, but I think a shout out to Seth Rogen, and I'm trying to find out the guy who plays the other bully as well. Both of them are very good, but also I thought someone else as you were talking. Hold on, let me look at the list.
Are we looking for Gretchen, Jenna Malone? Because we haven't really talked about. She does a great job.
No, but she's also great. Like literally everyone in this movie is great. There was a specific. It will come to me, but yeah, no. Everyone is brilliant. The Doctor, so his therapist. Oh, of course, James Duvrow as Frank.
James Duvall. Yes, James Duvall.
Because the difference is, and it's so like haunting because it just makes you go, "What the fuck is going on?"
Yeah.
When he later appears as Frank. As, what were you doing in the road? Like, it's such a... You understand they're two different people pretty much just from his performance.
Right.
In the hands of a lesser actor, if he's too frank at the end, to, Bunny instructing Donnie Frank at the end, you don't understand. You're even more confused. You don't understand what's going on at all. The choices he makes in not much dialogue to differentiate between the two is really impressive.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. I think that was another, again, just to give Richard Kelly credit for choices. He was really deliberate about that. He said he was talking about when he cast James Duvall, he wanted a guy that could just be a high school student. Could just be a guy that's like, hey man, I'm just going out for some beers, that guy. And he liked the contrast between the demonic mask. This, it's obviously not demonic. I know he actually gets quite annoyed that all the DVD box sets describe it as a demonic bunny. He's like, there is nothing demonic about this bunny. It's at best it's a reverse ghost. But this sinister figure that sort of haunts Donnie throughout the movie. This rabbit. When he was talking to the production crew and designing it, and he showed them the pictures, they were like, when we read the script, we thought it was just going to be like a guy in like a rabbit costume, like a Halloween rabbit costume. Why is it so evil looking? And he's like, because you need the contrast between Frank, the arbiter of instructions, the guide for Donnie through this weird situation, and Frank, the guy. When you see underneath it, you should just be like, oh, it's just some kid. Like, you should almost be disappointed at that reveal and again, it shows real intent in many areas from Richard Kelly's part, and I think that's a moment of really smart choices, both the casting and that choice to have a visual contrast between handsome James Duvall, who's could be just Frank going out for beers, and the fucking evil looking rabbit mask. Great choice.
Alex Greenwald is the other bully, and is great. Dan, I've just discovered, because I clicked on him on Wikipedia, he's the lead singer of Phantom Planet.
Is he really? Fascinating. So. Oh, that's actually extra interesting, because one of the alternate casting choices was Jason Schwartzman.
Oh, there you go. Nice.
Jason Schwartzman was almost Donnie Darko, which I think I would have liked less. I love Jason Schwartzman. He's great. I think he's a fantastic actor. I don't think I would have liked him as much as Jake. That's another happy accident, because I think maybe Schwartzman was maybe the preferred choice, but didn't work out, whatever reason. Scheduling doesn't specify in the triv. But that would have been funny, because that would have been two members of Phantom Planet in the movie. That's great. Mate, and obviously Seth Rogen's film debut here as well, and his first ever line spoken in a movie. I like your boobs. So on brand for Seth Rogen that's his first line in a feature film.
Yeah, for a movie that in general isn't on brand, he's fairly on brand in it.
Yeah.
Phantom Planet, side note, I've had 8 albums. How fucking crazy is that?
Is that real? Is Jason Schwartzman still the drummer? Surely not.
Have a little look. Well, at least they've had 8 albums with that other guy we were talking about. Let me see if it's separate to that.
Well, I just wonder if Jason Schwartzman, because he did Coconut Records, which is a music act I'm very, very fond of. If anyone is just wants some good music, go listen to Coconut Records. It's great. Jason Schwartzman's band that he put together. But he does a song where he says, "I was the drummer in a band," and he's referring to Phantom Planet.
So it looks like he was the drummer from 94 to 2003. Right. Since 2003, they actually released 3 albums. They've actually had 5 albums, and 2 of them were compilations in what I just said. So they've had 5 albums.
There you go.
Moving away from Phantom Planet, Dan, what else were you going to say about the film in general?
I wanted to talk about, because I knew we were going to have a big thing at the beginning about how much of what makes this film great was an accident, right? So I also wanted to make sure we talked about the stuff that was designed and intent and works really well. And I think Donnie's arc in this movie is a fucking stroke of genius. So, in broad strokes, and we haven't really done a plot recap of this movie, and I'm sorry for anyone who's listening to this without having seen Donnie Darko recently. I do apologise. We probably should have done this earlier. But basic thrust of the movie is Donnie sleepwalks out of his house at night. A jet engine lands in his room. And from that point on, we're in a sort of tangent, alternate timeline, and we're leading Donnie to realise he has to save everyone by killing himself. So he ends up going back in time with the jet engine that almost killed him on the first night, but staying in the room and the jet engine falling on him. The next thing that happens after the night that he nearly dies but doesn't because he's not in his room, Frank talks to him and tells him the world is coming to an end. So what you realise is, however you want to interpret it, whether it's technology, Richard Kelly's interpretation, which is it's people in the future using technology to manipulate time, realising they fucked up, and then sending Frank and other help to Donnie to help Donnie restore the timeline, which is a fucking weird interpretation of it that I don't care for.
That's fucking crazy.
I don't care for it. But so let's just stick with a slightly more mystical version of it. It's the universe correcting itself, which is my preferred interpretation. Tangents happen, paradoxes happen, and the universe is self-healing, right? So the tangent universe can't live forever. And at some point, the thing that caused the tangent, the artifact, that the engine, will have to be returned to the original timeline to straighten it out. And the universe is going to nudge Donnie in that direction in the meantime, right? That's my interpretation of what's happening in the plot of this movie. And again, open to interpretation. You might have felt differently about it, but that's the version of it that makes sense to me. Drew Barrymore's character tells him about the cellar door, which leads him back to Grandma Death's house and makes him go into the cellar, where he meets the bullies, and the bullies lead to a confrontation that leads to Gretchen's death, which is what finally makes Donnie feel like his sacrifice is worth everyone. Because at the beginning of the movie, when he's told the world is going to end, in his therapy, his therapist says, "Do you think the world is coming to an end?" And he says, "No, that's stupid." The universe knows that Donnie is refusing the call. Donnie does not believe what's happening. It knows that it needs to lead him and get him into a place where he's going to be willing to make that sacrifice. And how does the universe do that? By conspiring events in such a way that his girlfriend, his sister, and his mother die if he doesn't do it. Gretchen dies, and his mother and his sister are on the plane.
Yeah.
The universe knows he's the only one who can help. He's the sort of almost the chosen one. And it brings events together in such a way to lead Donnie to that. There's a moment you talked earlier about your favorite moment that's or what are the moments you preferred from the director's cut that you would almost wish would have been in the theatrical. I have one too, and it's the moment the therapist tells Donnie that what the drugs she's giving him are a placebo. Because I really like that
too. Yeah.
Because I like that leans into this idea that the universe was guiding Donnie to his choices. The fact that his medicine is a placebo is actually a really, really important moment because it's everyone, whether they're doing it intentionally or not, are guiding Donnie to his destiny.
I completely agree with that. It's a great moment, and I will say, although I talked more about it, almost slightly as a joke, if I could pick a moment to put in the theatrical cut, I'd actually pick the scene with him and his dad over the Drew Barrymore scene.
Right, yes, that's a great scene.
Because the scene with him and his dad aching to understand and connect and talk to Donnie was so lovely.
Right, and again, written so goddamn well. I think there's such a danger of dismissing Kelly's work here. If you focus on, which I knew we were going to have to, the wider flukes of the film. So yeah, I'm really glad we're getting a chance to talk about this stuff. So for me, Donnie's arc is a kid who's reluctant to save the world, being guided to choosing to do it. He goes from, do you think the world's coming to an end? No, that's stupid, to, I think I can time travel. And then doing it and sacrificing himself to save those he loves. That's a superhero story.
That's brilliant. It's fantastic, and it's like you say, it's so clever and intricate, and how. And in the beginning of the commentary, and I don't know if they talk more about this. Kevin Smith talking about, well, no, you made a comic book movie, is really fun and absolutely right. Mm-hmm. Speaking of decisions Kelly makes that are genius and should be praised and add so much to the movie. The music throughout is fucking phenomenal.
Right.
And just pitch perfect. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I think because we talked about the vibe movie thing earlier, the movie is in many ways a tone poem where it asks you to just sort of trust that you can feel what's happening in the movie. Even though you might not practically know that Donnie has gone from a guy that's reluctant to save the world to saving the world. Maybe the plot has gone over your head a bit because it's not presented in the clearest way, and especially on a first viewing, you may not come out exactly knowing what Donnie's done. You'll feel it, and one of the ways in which this film becomes a tone poem, becomes a vibe movie, is through the music. The music is so essential to creating the atmosphere of this film, and this film eats on that atmosphere. It lives on it. When you're not following the plot, you're just with the vibe. You're just the scene in the cinema when Donnie when he leaves from watching Evil Dead, which, by the way, bad choice, buddy. Watch the movie. It's a good movie. But when he leaves Evil Dead to go burn down Jim Cunningham's house, that's not incidental music, that's score, but the fucking score is so haunting in this film. So even when they're not doing the 80s bangers, which there are plenty of, from Notorious and Head Over Heels to Killing Moon and to Echo and the Bunnymen, Joy Division, this, no matter which side of this movie's music spectrum you're on.
You didn't even name, I know it's not an 80s banger, but you didn't even name Mad World there.
No.
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. That's a good point. I didn't even name Mad World.
For US viewers that don't know, Christmas #1 in the UK.
Yep. And that is obviously a cover of an 80s song from Tears for Fears.
Yes, that's very
true.
It's
the Gary Jules cover. And I think what's amazing about that is part of one of the reasons that movie got traction in the UK is that song went to #1 and it was connected to that movie. And that helped with the initial DVD sales, and it's why in the UK, Donnie Darko is a much bigger thing than it is elsewhere. And again, I'm not trying to diminish. I know in the States it was another cult-y, passed around sort of movie. And if you're into films and you grew up in the same era Chris and I did, if you're sort of in your 30s now, you probably still found the movie that same way. But in the UK, it really was a head-scratching phenomenon. Like, to marketing people, to the kinds of people that sit in boardrooms and talk about DVD sales at the time could not understand what happened here. To this day, I think people still don't really know how this occurred, because it was such an unlikely thing to happen. This is a movie that flopped in the box office. It came out right after 9/11. No one was in the mood for a tone poem. I think that's fair, especially one that involves a plane crashing at the end. This was an absolute failure on so many fronts, and then all of a sudden this DVD is just this thing everyone is buying, and it's still to this day confounding to a lot of people involved. But so yeah, I think you're right to praise the music, and I think both the incidental music, the score, and the 80s soundtrack is so powerful and used so well. And it turns out, again, I learned this from the commentary, that he wrote the music into the film. When he was writing it, he was listening to these songs and doing it. And the version in the director's cut, where some of the songs are switched around, you might have noticed, you might not have noticed, but the songs were in different places in the director's cut to the theatrical. Particularly the opening song is switched around with the song at the party. They're flip reversed, and that's actually the way it was supposed to be originally. That's what he wanted, but I don't know if there was issues with clearing it or something, and then they had to do some jigging, and then it was just, it ended up being what it was. But I do prefer the theatrical version of the way around the songs are, but the version that he showed at Sundance when he was trying to sell this movie had the songs the other way around. So I thought that was interesting. So yeah, I 100% echo your thoughts on the music.
For sure. What are your other headlines? What are your other notes?
The teenagers arguing, very weirdly accurate. How does one suck a fuck? What's a fuck ass? All that stuff, incredible. I know that we just talked elegantly, or not elegantly, but we talked about the sort of the power of the music and how it's a tone poem and it's this brilliant indie masterpiece. Yeah, at some point in this movie, someone asked the question, how exactly does someone suck a fuck?
At some point, it's early. That's the first scene of the family.
Yeah. But there is something so authentic and honest about that. And again, I want to credit Kelly's script, because he cribbed from his youth, and there's something so honest about that. Because he talks about, someone said like, oh, why didn't you set it modern day? It would have been cheaper to set it modern day. And he was just like, yeah, but my experiences aren't of a modern day teenager. I don't think I could honestly portray modern teenagers. I can talk about the angst teenagers felt in the 80s. Because that's where I grew up. So, I think that was a smart choice. I think he was right.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Let's briefly talk about the worst moment in the in teaching. Sit next to the boy you think is cutest.
Oh yeah,
I love her character, and I think it's so fucked that she gets fired in the end. Unless the only way they could have sold me on that firing is if the guy said, "You told her to sit next to the boy she thought was cutest. Get the fuck out of this school."
It's also
that should have been a fireable offense.
It's also like her the way she's like, let her make her choice, and like the smile when she chooses. Gretchen doesn't even say anything. It's just a look, and she's like, "Joni, move." Like, right. And again, I'm really torn with that scene, because it's so fucked up and stupid. But Drew Barrymore is fucking brilliant in that scene.
She is. She's great in this whole movie. The only thing that I think makes me get away, I think I get away with it, is that's another one of those the universe conspiring moments. That little devil that popped up in her brain and said, do it, was putting Gretchen and Donnie together, because the universe needed Donnie to meet and fall in love with Gretchen, so that when it takes her away, he does the right thing and saves everyone.
It's so funny though, isn't it? Because again, it's kind of that thing of you could have, if Gretchen comes in the other end of the classroom, maybe Gretchen and Donnie's eyes catch each other, and Drew Barrymore's character notices that and sort of smiles and kicks Joni out of her chair, and she's like, "Why do I have to move?" She's like, "Just move, just you move."
You're right,
and like you do. I know it's not fun to do that. But I think there are other ways of doing it other than have Drew Barrymore's character just be a bit weird.
Yeah. I agree with you. You're right. It could have been subtler, 100%.
Let's talk about you gotta. There's either the tears at the end.
I think we just broke Chris.
What?
No, you had a real let's talk. We should put the. And it was just like you've misfired for a second. It was like it's how I felt about an hour ago when we first started this conversation. I think my brain was switching
because
off.
Because it's not. The reason is because I just part of me loves that scene because the character, it's so wrong and fucked up. And when I watched it, I rewound that scene and watched it again because even in that moment watching it, I was torn of. This is really fucked up and weird and shouldn't happen. But also, Drew Barrymore just sells it so well, man. Like, and the look between Gretchen and Donnie is great as well. Like, it's a really good scene.
It is a great scene. It is a great scene.
The reason I was stumbling there is because that is no defense of what is happening, because what's happening is so fucked up. Speaking of, do you think either the tears of Patrick Swayze's character at the end could suggest realization? Or do you, and maybe even you could go further and go realization and that knowledge that actually he needs to hand himself in? Or do you think there's another way he's getting caught? Because there is that weird moment after you finish watching the movie where you realize, oh, that character doesn't get caught now, or at least doesn't get caught in the same way. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm a bit of a weirdo on this because I know a lot of people have issue with that, and I kind of like the incompleteness of it because it just makes you the world carries on is actually the message at the end, right? Because Donnie saved it, it gets to continue, and unfortunately, one of the things about an ongoing world is loose ends, right? That character doesn't, at least for the foreseeable future, get caught, get his comeuppance. I'd like to think that we live in a world, and the movie exists in a world, where he will ultimately be caught by someone in some way, but maybe not in a week and a half's time because someone burns down his house. You know? So, but what I like most about that moment at the end, with him crying, I think is, to me, I think he has had a very, very small echo of being caught, but I think mostly that's remorse. That's a man who's, you know, horrified to find himself a monster, and there's something satisfying in knowing that he's at least feeling the damage he's doing, that he's suffering for it, for his choices, you know. But I think if it had wrapped everything up in a perfect little bow, like the movie. Like, okay, let's say there's another version of this ending, right? We're doing Mad World, we're going to all the different people, and he's in his bed crying, and then you see the flicker of, like, red and blue police lights, because when that teacher, Kitty, woke up, she remembered more clearly what had occurred in the Tangent universe, and understood it was real now. And called the police, or whatever,
or maybe the notion that, you know, that headline, instead of like, or well, throughout the film we see that he denies it. Maybe you have a moment in this film where it's embedded in that actually he breaks down in court and admits everything. Like, so if that headline reads, I can't remember the character's name, but breaks down in court,
Jim Cunningham.
Jim Cunningham breaks down in court and admits to da-da-da. When you have him then crying at the end, and maybe he picks up the phone, or if you want to go really, like, melodramatic with it, he picks up a gun. Like, do you know what I mean? Having him do something like that, and then the notion is he remembers breaking down and finally admitting he's a monster, and now he's going to, one way or the other, deal with it.
But either way, I think for me, because it's so open, I was okay with that, because I think it's an imperfect world, and Donnie was saving the good and the bad. He was saving everything, you know, and you know, I like to think that character would eventually find justice, but I don't mind that the movie doesn't show that to me. I think as long as there's some sense of, like, acknowledging the character's wrongness, whether having him crying because he's scared of being caught, just had a dream where this annoying kid burnt down his house and he got found out, you know, or whether it is just a man who's woken up in the night because he knows he's a monster. Whatever interpretation of that moment is, it's a dark beat and not a happy one for that character. And that's enough, I think, for me. But I understand and empathize with people who felt there should be some other way of indicating he was getting justice, being taken off the street, being put away, you know, taken away from harming further. And I get that. I do. Because by saving the universe, Donnie saves a paedophile. Like, and that's not great, but it's you know, but that is the sort of dark side of this film's themes, I think, is that, like, you know, Donnie's not saving just the good ones, he's saving everyone. You know, all those people that bullied Charita Chen are saved. All the people who back Jim Cunningham even after he's basically found out to be that, they're saved too. The people who fired his teacher, his only good fucking teacher, the only one connecting with these fucking kids because she read them a book that they didn't like, they get to continue. Like, he's saving everything, good and bad, and I think I don't need comeuppance for that character as a result. I was happy to see that he was miserable. I needed that. That was the only catharsis I needed. And again, it comes back to it. Tone poem, vibe movie. I felt his suffering and went, yes, he's suffering. That's enough.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So yeah, but how did you? I mean, you asked the question, so I'm assuming you either felt similarly or differently to me. Where did you land on that? Did you need to see flickering blue and red lights through the window? Did you need some sort of closure?
I think I might have needed something until that interpretation of, well, he's saving, until you framed it, he's saving the good as well as the bad. That makes me go, actually, yeah, no, it's fine. I definitely felt it and was like, like watching the theatrical cut and then I felt it again at the director's cut. But I like that framing of, well, he's saving the whole universe, so
right, and that's going to be saving monsters and angels
and because he's crying, you can interpret it that way. Do you know what I mean? Yep. There's nothing to say that version of he broke. There's nothing to say because he denies it. We don't know. We don't see anything of it until after the court case and you know, beyond him getting arrested. So, hey, again,
maybe his guilt drove him crazy, and he admitted it. Handed himself in. What's
so wonderful about this film is it's open to interpretation. So my interpretation is he breaks down, admits that he's a monster in court, and then the reason he's crying is because he's feeling the weight of that admission, and he's going to address it somehow.
Yeah. No, 100%. That again. The accidental genius of Donnie Darko is you can't be wrong. Your interpretation cannot be wrong. The movie is open enough that any interpretation fits and makes sense, and that's wonderful. And that again, tone poem vibes, all the vibes. Sorry everyone, we had a technical hiccup. My mic died. We're back up. We didn't. Thankfully, that's happened once or twice before, and we've lost like 20 minutes and be like, oh, we're going to reset everything. We literally lost about, I'd say, 2 minutes less. So.
But what a 2 minutes they were, guys. Best 2 minutes of the podcast gone.
It was honestly the most interesting things we've ever said, and they're lost to time. It's a real shame. It's a tragedy, really. In those moments, Chris, we were funny, we were smart, we made excellent points. It was just like it was everything we wish the podcast would be, and it's just lost to time. You'll never hear it.
Yeah, we were sexier somehow.
Yeah. We were more charming. Yeah.
We can't recreate that, but you were talking about the Donnie's friends. So let's go from there.
I was talking about the Smurf scene, and it's Donnie's two buddies. I think I was getting to complimenting them too, because they're a really fun pair. They're a good contrast to Donnie, because Donnie is, you know, this dark loner throughout a lot of the film, right? And I think to humanize him a bit more, to show that he is actually just a normal teenager, showing him hanging out with his buddies, having that conversation about Smurfs, which on the surface you might go, well, that's innocuous, that scene should go, right? It's just, the scene, for those who don't remember, is they're like debating the purpose of Smurfette, and was she created to just, you know, to be there so that all the male Smurfs had someone to have sex with. And Donnie turns around and is like, no, Papa Smurf didn't even create Smurfette, Gargamel did, and they don't even have reproductive organs, they're asexual, and just corrects on that. But that conversation, I could see an executive producer or an editor or like someone from a studio going like, why is this scene in the movie? But I think it really humanizes Donnie in a way that you wouldn't get otherwise. It's a funny scene, so it already sort of earns its place in by being an entertaining scene. You know, Donnie's exasperation with his two fucking knucklehead buddies is great. But I think also what I like about it is it's a moment to show Donnie is mostly a normal teenager. Because if you just go by the line of the movie, he's always on his own and brooding and, you know, stabbing knives at mirrors. You know, like he's a troubled kid, and that is true. But it's nice to humanize him by showing him the other side of him too.
I think the other thing it does is it's a really good example, and again, you know, complimenting Richard Kelly and is how amazing the script is. It's giving us exposition in a really amusing scene, and that exposition is, like you say, he's got friends, he's got people that are with him, and rather than telling us what that relationship is, he's showing us that relationship by them having very typical teenage boyfriend conversations. It's very true to life, and is really getting across their relationship whilst being entertaining and not telling us what their relationship is showing us, which in turn then means you understand. Without that scene, I don't think you buy them following Donnie to the Grandma Death or whatever they call his house at the end of the movie, which they just jump on their bikes and like, what are you talking about? We don't understand what you're talking about, but yeah, okay, sure, we'll come with you. And they follow him on that journey. And I think it's because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the idea that like his buddies just no questions asked, like, where are we going? Cool. Hop on the bike, we go.
Well,
and it's a nice little E.T. moment that all the kids riding off on their bikes to I mean, it's a much darker thing they're going to, because Donnie is literally leading Gretchen to her death almost on purpose. Like he knows that's where he needs to go to save things.
How do they leave that scene? That's what I can't remember. How do they run away when the car appears, or run away from the bullies? Or...
Do they run off to get help, maybe?
Oh, maybe, yeah.
I can't remember. Yeah, I'd have to rewatch that scene to remember
yeah.
exactly where they end up going. But, big fan of that scene. I think the Smurf scene is pretty good, and I think it does a lot for the movie. Chris and I both found things that it improved. So I think that's a good scene. I'm not a huge fan of the way the movie speeds and slows down things all the time in the editing. I get it. It's a movie about time and time travel. And even when they do it's very literal. It's like time flies, you know, the end of the Duran Duran song, and then everything's moving quick. I don't care for it. I know what it's doing. It's too on the nose. Yeah, and it's very of its era. I feel like it's very like late 90s, early thousands to do that in a movie. Thanks, The Matrix. On the subject of some of the philosophy and the nuances of the film, not necessarily being as complex as they might seem on the surface, giving the impression of a script that's cleverer than maybe it is in some areas. I do think there's some quite shallow philosophy in the movie that seems grander in the absence of information, but there's also some really nice single liners, like, you know, or just interesting ideas that are just thrown out really casually. This movie burns through grand ideas quickly in the way I've never seen a movie do. When what Roberta Sparrow whispered to Donnie is that every living creature on Earth dies alone, and then he describes the search for God as being absurd, and the therapist says, so the search for God is absurd, and he goes, the search for God is absurd if everyone dies alone. And the way he ties that back, that is both genius and gibberish all at once. I fucking love that exchange. It's so good. It's so off kilter, and it's so open to interpretation. And I think as well, what's really funny about this is that Roberta tells him that everyone dies alone is her setting him up for losing Gretchen.
Yeah. Yeah.
The way it all comes together is genius.
And the way in which Gretchen dies is so heartbreaking. Yeah. It's so almost slapstick in its approach. It's so that moment is so brutal because it's so jarring with the rest of the movie. How like instant and how, like I say, almost it's violent in a really different way because it's like I say, it's a maybe not slapstick in tone, but it's a slapstick form of violence, which this movie doesn't really contain that much. So when that moment happens, again, genius decision on Richard Kelly's behalf, when that moment happens, it impacts you and takes you by surprise, and it's the first time you watch it, and throws you because of how different that moment plays out compared to the rest of the movie.
Yeah, 100% agree. 100% agree. Yeah. It's fascinating. How did you feel about like some of the hypnosis scenes? Like the ones where he's like, again, I guess it's normalizing. Like he's just reminding us, oh, it's just a normal teenager, this boy. But like the scene where he like, he's talking about Christina Applegate and he reaches down his pants. Like, how did you feel about that sort of stuff?
I think again, it kind of humanizes Donnie. Like it puts him in the frame of, oh, this is a teenage boy. I think, like you, the best hypnosis scene is the scene that's at the end of the director's cut with the two of them, where they end up hugging and holding each other. Right. Or she ends up holding him rather. But I didn't, I think you gotta, everything you just said about the Smurf scene, which someone could equally look at and go, oh, that's a bit grotesque. I don't like the tone of that. In the same way you could say that about the Married with Children scene. But also the start of that is, him talking about how he's thinking about sex a lot. And I think there's the notion, we don't know for sure whether him and Gretchen sleep together at the party, but there is something about before Donnie dies, he makes that connection and he is thinking about, sex and relationships, and he finds that. And you could, if you really wanted to spin it, you could spin that scene as he is a teenage boy, and actually he does, again, we don't know for sure whether they sleep together, but he does find some version of that at the end. Do. So, well, then there you go. Then, well, in that case, that scene helps.
I love the idea that right before the end, the universe is like, throw him a bone, literally.
But you know what I mean, and that scene helps that, and I think you've got numerous. I completely understand the Smurf scene and that scene. If people are like, oh, I don't like the tone of that, it's a bit. But I think both of them have the defense that you've given already for the Smurf scene of humanizing Donnie and framing him as he is also a teenage boy. And I think you could argue that they both kind of go, sex is a big thing for him and boys of that age. And like you say, before he dies, he makes that connection or is thrown a bone, however you want to, whichever degree of emotion and weight you want to put on it.
Yeah, I don't want to put any emotion on it. Like, let the kid get laid at least once before he kills himself. Jesus. Like... he shouldn't die not knowing that. Come on, let's sort the kid out. And I've got to ask the most important question about this film, Chris, and it's a line of dialogue from the movie. This is an exact quote, so I'm just going to repeat this. How do you feel about these hungry hippos? It's a line from the movie. I wrote a few of those weird little non sequiturs from the movie. That's one of the lines from the movie that I was just like, really? Like, it goes up. That's almost up there for me with, sometimes I doubt your commitment to sparkle motion.
On that scene, do you not think Donnie's mum were you not aching for Donnie's mum to be a bit more? What the fuck? You come at me with the moral high ground, and you're defending a paedophile.
No, I like it when, I'm not very good at doing this myself, but I like it when people let conservatives hang themselves. Just let her talk herself into a hole. Let's just give them the rope and let them do it. It's great. Just watch her talk herself into a fucking tizzy. Yeah, I'm never good at doing that. I'm the guy that's like, you're a fucking piece of shit. But I love it when there's someone who's got the fucking patience and the smarts to just like let them dig their own grave. Fucking brilliant. Like that guy, that famous interview from the UK where the guy was going on about how, you're all on about sustainable energy, but don't you work in lumber? The timber. Is that not that's not sustainable? He goes, well, trees are sustainable. You can grow more trees. You can't grow concrete. And the guy goes, yes, you can. And the guy just goes silent to let that sit. He doesn't go, are you fucking stupid? You don't grow concrete. He just lets it sit in silence and like smiles wryly. It's so good. And I would have been like, are you fucking... I would have jumped on it. Like, you just said concrete can be grown. Are you a fucking idiot? But instead he just lets the guy hang himself. It's genius. If you haven't seen that clip, dear listener, please dig it out. It's so good. Right. Let's talk about just general like vibes of like of teenagers. How accurately do you think this movie captures the teenage experience, or at least the angst and apathy of the teenage experience? And do you think that is connected to why this movie connected to so many people?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, and I think it absolutely does. I think there's a lot of teenage angst. There's a lot of teenage loneliness. There's also teenage bonding. There's teenage romance. I absolutely think it does. You?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a huge part of this movie's success. That there's so much of that in there, like, in terms of the fact that so many people feel this movie is about, like, in a movie that is categorically in the end proven to be about time travel, because he does physically, we do go back, we do see the events again, and they play out differently. I still think it does, in some ways, examine mental health, and how adults interact with teenagers, and why teenagers struggle so much, and why teenagers become the way they become in terms of like being difficult. That typical like, oh, difficult teenagers. I think it does manage to explore all that while being a science fiction movie, and one doesn't take away from the other. And I think it's it's ultimately a movie about Donnie coming to grips with his mental health so he can get over, he can accept himself, accept his mortality, and then sacrifice himself for everyone else's benefit. It's a movie about growing up, right? Like, Donnie has to grow up for this to happen.
I also think a really honest, and I think where it's so important, where people now recognise the importance of how people talk about these things, and how people talk about mental health, and all the subjects related to it. I think some of the sometimes modern day things feel they have to put certain things in. So I'll give you an example of a really nice a moment in this film that I thought felt really real. It's after he calls his mum a bitch, and she goes into the bedroom and says to her husband, "My son just called me a bitch," and he says, "You're not a bitch. You're bitchin', but you're not a bitch." And that's sort of that shouldn't be the. Do you know what I mean? That is no one's version of how that situation should be handled. That is not a productive way of handling that situation. No. But my God, does it feel real? Yeah. You know what I mean? It feels so honest. Like, that actually feels like how someone could react to that. Right. And I think there's elements of that in this movie that you might not get now, because actually what the thing would do now is try and have a discussion about it and all that sort of stuff, whereas I think what we get here is potentially very, very earnest, and like I say, very real.
There's something very real and human about so much of this film, and I think that's why it gets away with, that's why I still feel like this is a really great film, and I'm unambiguously going to recommend it. Because even though I know, as we talked about extensively, so much of this was a happy accident, there's also a huge amount of just really good, weirdly human, honest thoughts in this script. And yes, would this movie have been a complete mess if Richard Kelly had been allowed to do the version he wanted, where it's people from the future cracking timelines and using technology to interfere with everything and all that jazz that's sort of hinted at more heavily or clearly laid out in the director's cut. I still feel like the individual scenes of this movie would have been good. I still feel like we'd have been reviewing this movie now going like, well, we probably wouldn't have been reviewing the movie because I don't think it would have caught on the way it did. But like, we'd have been reviewing this movie now going like, yeah, you know, it doesn't really work from a plot perspective. It's a bit of a mess, but God, these characters are compelling. You know, God, these people feel real. You know, and I think there's really something to that. That's another ingredient to the magic of this movie's success, and also that its ability to draw people in.
Yeah, that scene we just discussed is you know, none of that stuff we've talked about to do with the director's cut, etc., plays a factor in changing that scene being amazing. Correct. You know, and that's so there are definitely those moments of dialogue, of script, of music choices. Well, really, we've referenced it a few times, but we've not talked about the director's cut since talking about those larger issues. Everything we've praised about the movie since, the music, the cast, the tone, the dialogue, the script, the way exposition is handled, is there regardless, and Richard Kelly and the team should be praised for it.
Yeah, and I do think the director's cut is also. I must admit that I do think the pacing of the director's cut is all wrong, and I do think some of the tone is hurt. Sadly, I think all the character stuff that we just talked about and praised is still there. That authenticity, that realness, that's still present because the scenes contain those moments. But I actually just think even if you're not fussed about the extra plot information, if that doesn't bother you and you're happy to just watch a longer version of the movie, I still think the director's cut suffers from just like pacing issues and tone not being as clear, because it goes a bit more digital, a bit more technological in its explanations of things. It strips the movie of some of the tone and the magic and the weird sort of atmosphere that it creates, I think. Not completely, but one of the things I love mostly about this movie as well when I was rewatching it, and I remember I talked earlier about this whole tone poem vibe film. This movie feels like it goes increasingly more off-kilter as we skew further from the original timeline. Even before I knew there was a tangent universe, I know there's a moment of divergence. Even in the original cut, forgetting the director's cut, there's a moment where the timeline diverges, right? Into this new reality. And it feels like, because this reality is doomed to collapse, and we know that because Frank says it again in the original cut, this world ends in 28 days, right? Or whatever it is. The movie feels like someone has spun a top. You know, those little toys that you spin. And at first, it's spinning quite stably. But the further we go in, it starts to wobble. And wobble. And wobble. Like it's about to just fall over, right? It's so close to just tumbling. And that's a tone version of what's physically happening in this film. Because what's physically happening in this film is the universe is collapsing, right? And how it manifests to me, the viewer, other than the practical that Frank has put that time frame on it, is things just get weirder and weirder. Donnie's visions get stronger. You know, teachers from school are having their houses burnt down. There's a kiddie porn dungeon. There's, you know, it's all just escalating and escalating at a pace and a tone that just feels like it's just all about to collapse any minute. And then it does. But so much of that is tone, not plot. The characters aren't sitting around going, the world's off kilter. I'm being taught that by the movie, by the way it's pacing, and the way the pacing is picking up as it goes, and the way the scenes are constructed that make the world feel like it's going more and more away from where it should be. And the further away it gets from its prime timeline, the weirder it gets. You know, the stranger these events become. And I just think the director's cut loses a lot of that because of the pacing changes. And I think that's so strange. And again, maybe hints at accident, maybe. That one is harder to prove because it's not outright like, you know, some of the more didactic sort of physical plot stuff that you can point to. But how this movie makes me feel when I watch it, the original cut, is absolutely not replicated in the director's cut. It feels so much colder, so much less engaging. And I think part of that is the physical, all the explanations I don't want. But part of it, I think there is a tonal thing that shifts. I don't think it's that he moved the music around. I think that's fine. I think I prefer the original version, but the switching the songs' positions in the film doesn't change it tonally in the way I'm talking about. Yeah, I think it's a lot to do with the pacing. It's a lot to do with the pacing. That was a very long rant for that point, and I'm hopefully,
no.
hopefully people found that interesting.
Have you got any other notes before we?
Yes, Charita Chen's ear warmers, which I love because it feels like she wears those to block out the bullying. And just the moment when Donnie takes them off her to tell her that she's going to be okay, she almost can't handle the compliment coming from Donnie, and she runs off. But he has the ear warmers, and then the very next shot, we just see Donnie walking along, happily wearing the ear warmers, the earmuffs.
Yeah.
Just,
I thought that
glorious. It's such a great choice. I love it. I love the dialogue for the end of the movie that sort of closes Donnie's arc. You know, from being the kid that said the world's not going to end, that's stupid, to saying, and I wrote this down because I found this so brilliant. When the world ends, I'll breathe a sigh of relief because there will be so much more to look forward to. Yeah. That's great. That you cannot deny that writing wise. You can
not at all.
Point to 100 things about this movie that are accidents, as we have done, but that line is brilliant.
Yeah, there's an incredible amount of genius in the writing throughout, for sure.
Yeah. Yep. Anything else? Let's have a look. Yeah, I've written that taking any agency to work it out at the end, what the characters are feeling. You know, why does Thingy touch his eye? You know, why is Jim Cunningham crying? You know, and Frank was touching the eye. You know, instead of letting us work that out for ourselves and just telling us that they remember echoes of this stuff in their dreams with the text on screen, I prefer the idea that I can work it out for myself, that they're haunted by the Tangent Universe. I made a few notes about that. I really didn't like that. Everything else I think we've covered. Yeah. So yeah, I think watch Donnie Darko. It's brilliant. It's really, if you've listened to all this, we've spoiled all the movie, but like, it still really works. I watched it with Nadia. We both had a really good time rewatching it. Did you watch it with Jess, or did you watch it alone?
No, just because in order to fit in watching all of it, I watched it when she was doing something else. So yeah,
gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, let's
in that case, let's trivia it up.
We'll give you some trivia. So, even though he was well out of his teens at the time, they offered the role to Vince Vaughn at one point.
Jeez,
and it was Vince Vaughn that turned.
That would have been as good.
Yeah, and it was Vince Vaughn that turned it down because of his age. Thank you, Vince.
Yeah. Well done, Vince. Good call.
Good call. As much as you might have wanted to do the role, like I get it. Mark Wahlberg was apparently interested in the part, but was only willing to play the part if he was allowed to give the character a lisp.
You know.
That's the opposite. That's that's two ends of the spectrum. Vince Vaughn politely turning down the role because he didn't think he was the right age, and Mark Wahlberg insisting he get the role but play it with a lisp is a real. Those are two vibes. yeah,
for sure.
As I mentioned earlier, Jason Schwartzman was originally strongly considered for the role of Donnie, but dropped out due to scheduling conflicts. Apparently, Tim Robbins was the first choice for Eddie Darko. Now, I know you've got some strong feelings in the trousers about Tim Robbins, Chris. Would that have been better for you, or are you happy with the actor we got for Eddie Darko, his dad?
God, I can't remember the context of the Tim Robbins thing. Was I just a bit thirsty for Tim Robbins when we did Shawshank or something?
Oh, you had a whole discussion about him on the beach at the end.
Oh yeah, he does. Oh yeah, no, he does. He does look good on the beach at the end.
He's got like he's got like his shirt open a bit, I think. And you were taken by that. Yeah, I agree with you though. Let's not mince words here. It's a good looking man. I'm on board. With your Tim Robbins. Yeah, that's I'm not mocking. I'm just observing. But would you prefer
things being a mood? If I could live my life as Tim Robbins on the beach in Shawshank, no, I think the casting. I think the casting we got was brilliant. I'll be honest with you, Dan. There's not a cast member I would want to change in this.
Yeah, that's fair. I think there's one other option here that we have of an alternate casting that I kind of went, yeah, maybe. Mara Wilson of Matilda fame. And A Simple Wish, which is a film I really enjoyed as a kid, and I'm terrified to rewatch because I'm absolutely certain it's terrible. You know, when you just think back to it, you go, I'm sure that's bad. I'm sure. Like, I'm not even. So it will probably come up on here at some point, but I loved that film so much, and as an adult, I just remembering it. I know. Anyway, before Mara Wilson retired from acting, she did get the script for this film to read for the role of Samantha Darko, but apparently she was too freaked out at the script and declined even turning up to the audition. Although she has said since that she was physically ill in a hotel room in England at the time because she was shooting something else, and maybe it wasn't the best state to read the script in. So, that's fair.
Fair enough.
Apparently, Jake Gyllenhaal used the strategy of rarely blinking to enhance his creepiness as he's driven by Frank in those scenes. Yeah, it works quite well. It's pretty upsetting.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We talked about that. His choices. He for an actor of 19. He made some spellbinding choices in this film. Agreed.
When casting the role of Donnie's sister, it came to writer-director Richard Kelly's attention that Maggie Gyllenhaal, who had sort of had a couple of films under her belt at that point, would be available for the shoot. And while he was slightly hesitant towards the idea at the beginning, he doesn't specify why here. But I kind of think if I was guessing why he was hesitant to do that, it does feel gimmicky to hire an actual brother and sister, rather than like, is that the right person for this specific role? You know, and also knowing that Jake wasn't necessarily his first choice for Donnie, I could see there being. I could imagine a world where he was wary of that idea, but he did then obviously acknowledge that he wouldn't really have to do much work to recreate a sibling rivalry between the two. So,
but also I think Maggie's part isn't. She's brilliant, and the part is still great, and I love their relationship, how it's bickering earlier, but then when he's like, "Shall we throw a party?" She's like, "Yeah," and I love that look of like, when she sees her brother going off with a girl and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So I think the part is as good as the part can be, and she makes it as good as she can make it.
Right.
But I don't think I don't think the sister role is big enough for it to be too much of a stunt casting thing that they're actually brother and sister, etc.
Oh well, I didn't mean stunt casting in the sense of she's a big name. I just meant more of a.
I get it. No,
like a talking point of like, hey, we had an actual brother and sister. You know, something to say in interviews and in press and stuff.
Yeah, no, I get that completely, but I don't think that's an issue.
Yeah, I agree with that. Filmed over a period of 28 days, which actually matches the length of time depicted in the film. I thought that was fun. So, I love this so much because this is such a weird thing. So, originally, Donnie and Gretchen were going to go to the theatre to watch a movie called Chud, which, what did it stand for? It was like, oh God, it was, does it have it here? Wait, it's a 1984 film. Stands for, what does it stand for? Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dwellers.
Well, there we go.
Sure. So that's a movie he wanted to have on screen. But there were actually troubles finding out simply who owned the rights to the movie. So Kevin Smith talked about this in the commentary because he had the same problem. So some weird thing about this movie, Chud, its rights changed hands a bunch of times, and then several of the companies that owned the rights went under, to the point where no one currently, or at least at the time of doing the commentary for the director's cut, so in like 2004-ish, no one at the time at least knew who owned the rights to that movie. Which meant when you go to a studio and say, I want to use a clip from Chud, they go, well, we just need to clear it with the studio that made it, or own it. And they're like, we don't know who that is. They're like, well, you can't use it then, because we're not going to risk someone coming out of the woodwork 3 years from now and charging us a bunch of money. So, as a result, Kevin Smith couldn't use it for something, and neither could Richard Kelly. And they both tried to.
That's awesome.
What a fucking weird thing. Just like no one knows who owns that. That's bonkers. I love that. So then no one could get it cleared. I think Smith explained that what he wanted to do was remake it, like do a modern remake of it or something with his buddies. Like it was Walt Flanagan and what's his face, the other guy, Brian Johnson, I think that's his name.
Yeah,
but
Brian Johnson.
That's so funny to me. But basically, it was Sam Raimi that came to the rescue for Kelly and allowed him to use and distort the footage from The Evil Dead, the original one from 1981, completely free of charge. Sam Raimi was just...
Go Sam Raimi.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The beauty of Sam Raimi was that Evil Dead is that he made that movie himself with his own money, and he kind of owned it to a point where he could do that. Like, it wasn't like he had to clear it with a studio. He had the power to do that because it was an indie film of its own. And I think that's very nice of him. They filmed the scene at the Aero Theater, which is in Santa Monica, in California. That cinema actually closed in 2003, but reopened in 2005, and they run yearly screenings of Donnie Darko at Easter.
Get out. Okay.
Rabbit, Chris. Do you get it? There's a rabbit.
Yeah, no, I get it, Dan. I think my problem is not getting it.
Patrick Swayze actually wore all of his own clothes from the 80s for the film. He must have just had a cupboard full of old 80s clothes. I went, yeah, I got it. I love that. That makes me happy. So, according to the commentary on the original DVD, now I didn't listen to that commentary. I listened to the commentary for the director's cut with Kevin Smith, but there's a commentary with the cast on the first DVD, which, if I did listen to it, I listened to it when I was very young, and I don't remember it at all. But apparently, according to Richard Kelly, the man in the red jogging suit that's seen multiple times in the movie, he's watching Gretchen and Donnie when they kiss, he is supposed to be an agent of the FAA, because they were so confused why a jet engine would show up falling from the sky, not on a flight path, with a serial number that matched a plane that was completely intact. They were so confused by what happened, they were investigating the Darkos and following them around.
Which does make sense. Like, that works, I think.
Yeah. It makes as much sense as anything fucking else in the movie. Yeah, there's a logic to it. They don't explain it, but it's there, and you can put it together. So yeah. The mystery woman scene during the Sparkle Motion talent show performance is supposed to be the talent scout for Star Search, which is the show they then get invited to. So apparently there's a woman in the crowd that's like not been previously featured in the movie, and I guess people were wondering who that was, and it's supposed to be the camera focuses on her for a moment, and I guess the audience or some people asked the question of who that was, and that's who it was, turned out. During the conversations, this is a strange one. During the conversations about sex with his therapist, the script had Donnie describe fantasies around Alyssa Milano in the original sort of version of it. And apparently, when you make a lot of references to pop culture and people in pop culture, the studio will run the document through lawyers, the script, essentially, and they'll point out any areas you might have issues, basically. And Kevin Smith said because his films are full of pop culture references, the document he gets back is like too big to read, so he just ignores it mostly, unless there's anything they've really highlighted. But apparently, Alyssa Milano's mum, when they reached out about this mention, threatened to sue. And while she probably wouldn't have a case, because obviously just describing a teenage boy having fantasized about her is probably not any sort of breach of copyright, or not copyright, but like, personal use, they just avoided it. They just avoided it because they didn't want the ball ache, basically, and they changed it to Christina Applegate. And apparently, around the time Alyssa Milano was there was an issue where someone had like photoshopped. This is in the sort of the early days of these, some of these computer programs being powerful enough to do this. Someone had photoshopped Melissa Milano's face onto a naked body, and they were suing about that too. So I think
it just felt wrong, and that makes sense.
They made a choice not to do it, so they changed it to Christina Applegate. A side story that I found out from the commentary: Richard Kelly eventually met Alyssa Milano, Christina Applegate, who had seen the movie and decided to fuck with him, and was like, "So you wanted to sleep with me when you were a teenager, did you?" And wound him up for a good couple of minutes before acknowledging she was just joking and that she thought the scene was very charming. That makes me love Christina Applegate. That's great.
For sure.
What a great, charming way to handle that. And I'd
agree with that.
Yeah, 100%. On On the set of Charlie's Angels, Drew Barrymore and Richard Kelly agreed that her production company, Flower Films, would produce this film for $4.5 million, with the condition she'd get to play Miss Pomeroy. Kelly says that if Barrymore hadn't stepped in, the movie probably would have gone straight to video or straight to cable via Starz. So she got the movie financed with her production company, and that's lovely. Good work.
Yeah, fair play. Fair play, Drew Barrymore.
Yeah, he also told a really interesting story, actually, that there was a huge amount of buzz about the film heading into Sundance. And when they got to Sundance, all the people that were excited to maybe bid for the distribution of this movie shat themselves because no one knew how to market or what to do with it once they actually saw it. So everyone backed away. And there was a point even then, after it had been made, where it wasn't going to see the light of day. Yeah, that's very unfortunate.
I can see that, though. I can see why someone, having to spend a lot of money would look at it and go,
Right, and that's what's really interesting as well, is the version that aired at Sundance is reportedly closer, not exactly, because he added a bunch of stuff, but closer to the director's cut than the version that we got. So presumably, whichever studio did decide to finally back it for release, they're the ones who had the film cut within an inch of its life. So that's pretty interesting. At the start of the movie, this is part of my other trivia. Actually, I'll come back to that one. That's slightly part of Cars Exist, so we'll come back to that. The original advertising material that for this movie featured imagery of the crashing plane. A lot of the plane in the imagery, according to this trivia. And because it opened close to September 11th, naturally all of that material was pulled. And between that and the, let's say, tone of the nation in the States at the time following 9/11, it contributed massively to this film flopping at the box office. Because they had to pull all the advertising, and then people weren't exactly in a cinema-going mood anyway. And when they were probably going to go see something light, not this. So it was a bit of a victim. And it always makes me laugh because you watched Arrested Development, didn't you, back in the day? There's that amazing bit when someone asks Tobias why his relationship with his wife fell apart, and he goes, "I don't want to blame it on 9/11, but it certainly didn't help." Yeah. Whenever someone blames something on 9/11, I'm always like, really? But that sounds like that's legit. So Jim Cunningham's Visions infomercials were apparently shot at Patrick Swayze's own personal ranch, which is in Lakeview Terrace, California. So that's interesting. Interestingly, I just used the word again because it's in front of me. Initially, Richard Kelly sought permissions from the estate of Peyo, who owned the Smurfs, to show a Smurf doll for Donnie and his friends to shoot at. And while that was nixed, on that same conference call, oh my God, why is my ability to speak on? On that same conference call, Kelly was told by the people who owned the Smurfs that Donnie would be allowed quite comfortably to talk about Smurf sex because everything that was written in the script from Donnie's perspective was exactly accurate.
Fantastic. That's brilliant.
They are asexual. They don't got bits down there. And, Gargamel did indeed create Smurfette. So that's fun.
Brilliant. Love them for that. Fantastic.
Yep, good work. 10 points. The words Celador written on the chalkboard in the classroom are obviously a big part of this movie, and they lead him to going. They're a guide for Donnie in many ways to go to the cellar for Grandma Deaths, which lead him to the bullies, which leads him to, everything that then follows. In the movie, it's a famous linguist once said, Celador is the most beautiful. In the director's commentary, Richard Kelly mistakenly attributes it to Edgar Allan Poe. It was J.R. Tolkien who said it in a 1955 essay, English and Welsh. He said, the most English-speaking people will admit that Celador is beautiful, especially if disassociated from its sense and from its spelling. More beautiful than, say, sky, and far more beautiful than beautiful. It's interesting. I think, again, this is another one of those things where it's like easy target Richard Kelly. I know a lot of people posit that this movie is faux intellectual and that it's actually, there's nothing smart about the film, and it pretends to be, and people ponder these things. Look, just because he mistakenly attributed the sentence to Poe and not Tolkien, I don't think that's proof of Richard Kelly being some sort of mega idiot. I've seen people use that argument, and misattributing a quote is not a crime.
No, I would agree.
Nor is it evidence of any sort of, whatever they're trying to imply about Richard Kelly when they say stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, because even though I back the notion that the movie's an accident, I don't back the idea that this guy's some sort of moron. I think the evidence for the movie, to some degree, being intent is there, or certain elements of it at least. So, Drew Barrymore is apparently only 5 years older than Jake Gyllenhaal, despite playing his teacher in this movie. I find that funny. For budgetary reasons, Catherine Ross and Mary McDonnell. Mary McDonnell, of course, who played his mother. And who's Catherine Ross? I'm actually not sure who Catherine Ross is. She played... Oh, the Doctor. She's the Doctor. Both of them were just paid scale for this film, which is basically the minimum amount, the least possible amount you can pay an actor to work in a movie. I don't know if they took that on purpose to help get the movie made on within its budget or what, but that is incredible considering they're two of the best performances in the movie.
Yeah. Two absolutely stunning performances. So yeah.
So nerds, Chris. Nerds have figured out that roughly it takes about an hour for Donnie to leave the movie theatre, go to Jim Cunningham's house, start the fire, and then get back to the theatre. They've worked this out by noting which scene in The Evil Dead he leaves in and which scene he returns to the cinema during, which is just in time to get the end of the film. If you listen, you can hear Ash's scream, which indicates the end of the movie. So they timed it as he was roughly gone for about an hour.
It is funny that she just doesn't wake up, isn't it?
Yeah, like at no point. And also that they're completely alone in that giant theatre.
Yeah.
No one fancied seeing Evil Dead that week? Really? No one?
Nope. Probably not.
Not even the guy in the red jumpsuit sat in the back? Like, I don't know, that seems weird. Anyway.
Yeah, he followed them into the woods, but he's like, Evil Dead? Nah, fuck that.
Yeah. It's a good movie. Anyway, right, it's time for Cars Exist, Chris.
No.
So the Darko's car, Chris, and I don't want you to get too excited here, right? So just temper. It's a 1989 Ford Taurus. What? Wagon. It's different. It's different to the Ford Taurus show. So there is no comment from our good friend JJ_John_Johnny on the Cars Exist segment this week. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, just listen to some previous episodes we talked about that. I'm not going to go re-explain. But it's a Ford Taurus wagon from 1989. It's a nice car. So, this is the trivia I skipped over earlier, because it's partly trivia for the movie, but partly Cars Exist. So, at the start of the movie, when Donnie is riding his bicycle back into town, right at the beginning of the movie, he passes two ladies power walking, and then a 1977 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am car in red passes Donnie. And if you're thinking, and that's Frank's car. Frank's right at the start of the movie.
Oh wow!
That's
cool.
That is the car that ultimately is the car that runs over Gretchen later in the movie, and it is there for a minute.
That's great. Yeah, that's wicked.
On the point of Frank, did you pick up that Frank is going out with Donnie's sister?
She certainly makes a lot of references to him, so no, but that makes sense. I just kind of thought they were friends. I didn't think too much about it, but if you would have asked me watching it, I'd have assumed friends.
Yeah, they're a couple, it turns out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why when she's being dropped off at the beginning of the movie, it's presumably Frank that's dropping her off. And she refers to her boyfriend at multiple points in the movie, like when she's on the phone. Earlier in the movie, she talks about she was staying for him initially, but now she's going to go to Harvard or whatever. So yeah, and that's why she's the one at the party that says, "Where's Frank?" when someone's like, he's out for a beer run.
It's quite nice the notion that one of the reasons then he's potentially so involved is because he's presumably then near when the incident occurs.
Right.
She drops him off. He's only just dropped her off. He's there when that thing crashes through, so therefore
he's
that sucks
nearby,
him into
for sure.
the story.
So some people have pointed out that's like they think that's like a inconsistency, because obviously when we go to the end of the movie, the thing falls through, kills Donnie, and then we cut around and see everyone's reactions, and Frank is home. But Richard Kelly has spoken about this and said, well, not everyone immediately, the second that thing falls through the roof, reacts. It's, let's say it's like over 45 minutes, it's over an hour, it's like he's got home, and then that's when we're seeing him sat at home touching his eye. Like that's that
the family's part in that montage is the next morning. Outside.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah, 100%. So I understand the implication that it's the moment that thing hits, they're all reacting to Donnie saving the universe. But I think it trickled. I don't think it happened immediately. So there you go. Anyway, so that leaves us with one question, Chris. One very large question. Do you know how many pairs of glasses Daniel Radcliffe went through in the Harry Potter movies?
I can't. You know what? I can't even remember what the figure is. 180.
Yes, I love it.
Is it 180?
You're so close. It's 160.
Right. Okay. And I'll be honest with you again, mate. I can't even remember if the trivia is real or not. What
it is real.
Was it?
Yeah. He went through 160 pairs of glasses across the entire franchise.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
So that's Donnie Darko.
That's Donnie Darko, people.
Really glad we finally tackled it. It was a mammoth going through, because I did essentially have to watch the film 3 times. And I'm sorry if I sort of rambled huge amounts through this one. I had a lot to say on this movie. This movie, really always inspires a huge amount of thoughts in me, both in a practical sense of it's so fascinating to come back to that discussion of, if a movie works, does it really matter what the intent of the creator was? Because maybe the creator got it, didn't even execute the idea they had well, but what ended up on screen is a thing that works for you. Does that matter? It's an interesting discussion. And then even figuring out what the intent was, and whether it was an accident or not, is in itself fascinating. And there are so few movies where you've got such hard evidence of the director's original goals, but this director's cut is a fucking treasure trove of evidence of what the intent was versus what we got. And there's so few movies we can have discussions like that about. So the idea of getting to this movie at some point and analysing that was always really exciting to me. So I'm very sorry for anyone listening going Dan talked way too much.
No, I don't think so. I'd echo that. I think it's a very, very fascinating discussion, I'm very pleased we did it, and it certainly feels like one of those, we're about to go into our 6th season of this podcast, after
I think we're finishing our 6th. I think the next season is the 7th.
That's crazy. Still doing tentpole movies is amazing.
Yeah.
In terms of, echo the genius. Watch Johnny Darko again if you've listened to this confused because you can't remember a lot of it, as I would have done. But I find whenever I do that, it's the reason I fall behind on most rewatch podcasts. In fact, all of them, even Pod Meets World, which I love, is because it reaches a point where you go, I really need to watch the episode and then listen to the podcast.
Yep.
And you just end up falling behind. Office Ladies have, I believe, reached a point where Steve Carell has left. How nuts is that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting actually, because I mentioned in our Discord we were covering this film. And I saw a lot of comments of I need an excuse to rewatch that. I've been meaning to watch that, or so it's from CB Jenga here on our Discord has said, one of my favourite movies during high school. I don't think I've watched it in almost 20 years. Punkfish says, I haven't seen it in years. I must have been a teenager still. So a lot of people with that echo. And we got Farzin saying, I've heard so many good things about Donnie Darko, but I've never actually seen it. This could be a great excuse for me to do that. So I'm hoping, I would love to hear anybody's stories of either rediscovering or discovering this movie following on from us doing this, and obviously throw the comments down below. But the main question I have right now, Chris, the big question is, how is your commitment to Sparkle Motion now?
Oh, I'm absolutely committed. I want them to, I want them to...
They got to go to finals.
Search Star or whatever it was called.
Yeah. No, my actual big question, Chris, is where are we going next? That's the question.
Well, we've toyed with, have we agreed, did we conclude whether we're going to do a season of sequels, or are we leaving that for a bit?
No,
or...
we can't do it in the next season, because if we do it in the next season, it hurts, because the next season is going to occur across Christmas, and it's going to fuck our ability to do Christmas movies. So what I've said, what we said to each other, and I don't know if I've said on the podcast, but we are toying with the idea of doing a whole season where we just mop up a bunch of sequels we've not done yet for movies we've already covered, and that we've looked and checked, we definitely have enough. And actually, even today, we've just added a new one, because there is a Donnie Darko sequel.
Yeah. Oh, we've got so many that we could still choose we could choose a sequel next year to choose a sequel and still have enough to do 11 sequels.
Yeah. So and S. Darko I've never seen. It was a doomed movie from day one, because Richard Kelly denounced it, said the studio doing it without any involvement of him, and while he gets a credit as characters created by, because they are legally required to, he has absolutely denounced that film. He has in recent years hinted he might return to the world of Donnie Darko, which I think is interesting, but
I don't think anyone even... Does anyone come back? I don't think any of the actors
I think the actress that played Samantha Darko comes back.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
I think Davine Chase, who plays Samantha Darko in this movie, it returns to play her in S. Darko. Let me double check that and make sure I'm not lying. But that was my memory of it when they were promoting it. Yeah, S. Darko. She's in that.
Let's do it, Dan, because I've basically been as I didn't really have a choice going in, and as we were talking about tone poems,
yes,
I've had a choice between two, and one of them I want to do more because I think it's going to hold up better, and I think it's a really sweet, like, you and I watched it together.
I'm so glad we've stopped doing open the season with a bad movie.
Oh yeah. No, we're not doing that. Although,
oh shit,
I'm not sure. Well, no, because I'm not sure. There's a real question mark of when analysing this movie in a modern perspective. But you know what? I wanted to do a real tentpole rewind reviews movies. So in the spirit of tone poems, Dan,
go on.
We're finally gonna do it. It's a big one for us. We're going to go there. We're going to do Clerks.
I knew you were going to say Clerks. Yes. On board. Very on board. Love it. Clerks is a huge one. Yeah, Clerks is another one of those movies you feel like you discovered. And I think that's why Kevin Smith recognised it in Donnie Darko. And I think if we're ending one season and we're going into the next one with a similar idea of a movie that's kind of just all about the vibe.
But how it holds up in an analytical perspective, and those are very different things. I think you and I are probably still going to enjoy the movie either way, but sometimes it's you enjoy it, but go, it's got these issues with it.
Yeah, and look, this is a movie, or this is a director, I should say, that we both had a big love for, and I my teenage years, like Clerks, really spoke to me. It felt like, and then when we got to uni, and like I can't remember, did we sort of share your discovery of the Kevin Smith movies, or did you already know? I can't remember.
Well, it's very weird, and we'll talk about it more next time, but it's very weird because I discovered an affinity with Kevin Smith before necessarily an affinity with his movies.
Right, because of podcasts.
Because of the podcast and because of the Q&As. There are still Kevin Smith movies I haven't seen. I think maybe only one, your favourite, ironically. But still.
Wait, which one have you not seen?
Oh, no, technically. I've not seen Red State.
Yeah, that is one of my favourites. It's not I don't think it's my very favourite because it's not really a representation of a Kevin Smith film in the wider sense.
Yeah.
But it's probably, practically speaking, like more objectively speaking, it's probably his best film. But it's probably not my favourite, if that makes sense. With that difference again between best and favourite. I love Red State a lot, but it's probably not my favourite Kevin Smith film because it doesn't really represent, what a Kevin Smith film is.
Do we? Because I was going to say actually 2 movies because I've not seen Clerks 3 yet either, which is bizarre because I'm a huge Kevin Smith fan. I've heard him talk about Clerks 3 a lot, but Dan and I want to watch that together. Maybe this is an excuse. We don't know for sure, but maybe we'll end up doing that. Maybe we make this the excuse to watch it together, and actually that's our trilogy for next year, and we do.
Oh, you think? You think we do the Clerks trilogy?
Maybe, and we watch them together.
Wow, that would be a lot. That would be a lot. We'll swing back to that because that's a big one. But but yeah, I'm very.
Oh no, because to be fair, we wouldn't need to watch them all together. We'd just need to watch the third one together. So if we knew when we were going to meet up to watch the third together, we could then do 1 and 2 separately at home. Right. Yeah, we'll work that out. We're not saying we're doing that. We're not saying we're doing that at all. But yeah, I just suddenly realised this could be an excuse to because I would like to.
I am like dangerously close to wetting myself, Chris. Is it okay if I run to the toilet while you either continue with talking about Cozy? Because I'm 100% on board with this. I think it's a great choice, and it's the director that every year after we finish the season of Rewind Reviews, Chris and I say, "How have we not done one of his films yet?" Like we're big fans,
for sure.
You know,
for
it's
sure.
mad. I think you okay to do the wrap up while I pee?
I'll do the wrap up. Will you pee? Running. So. You can, if you've got thoughts, I'll do the wrap up, and then Dan can correct me when I get a lot of it wrong. Although, let me see if I can pull it up to make sure I'm definitely not wrong. Although by the time I've flipping done that, it'll probably be back. But anyway, yeah, right. Here we go, people. I'm ready. Nope, I'm not. Right, you can. Well, I'll do Twitter first because I know Twitter. So we're not really using Twitter, but Dan has got his settings set so that if you were to contact us via Twitter by tagging at Dan Doolan, or potentially tagging at Nothing But Static without the G, I believe. I can't remember for sure which one it is, but it will reach Dan. It will reach us at Nothing But Static UK on YouTube. I believe it's email. I don't know the email address. I never know the email address. Dan is either listening to this with me on mute, going to the loo, laughing about how he doesn't know. I don't know the email address. I'd like to think he's laughing whilst peeing, and it's going everywhere.
I was laughing. It's mail at nothingbutstatic.co.uk. The reason you're confused is because originally, back in the day, when you were actually listening to what I said in these end bits, it was Nothing But Static without the G at gmail.com, and I said that for years. And then when I switched, you heard me end these podcasts so many times, you were very understandably just switching off once I was doing it. So I think it's the original one is still in your brain, which is why you struggle with that. And that will still get to us. Nothing But Static without the G at gmail.com still reaches us, but the email address we set up to make it a bit simpler is mail at nothingbutstatic.co.uk.
Right, fair enough. Twitter doesn't have the G, already mentioned that. YouTube covered, so the only other thing really is the Patreon. We are on Patreon on Nothing But Static. You get episodes ahead of time. If you're a huge Cora fan, if that's really why you're here and you're just sort of putting up with the rest, then Cora is back. But if you're listening to this on Spotify, you can get Cora already a week early. You can get Cora now. It will be on the Patreon for as little as $1. If you can't afford to give, don't worry. If you can and you only want to give $1, absolutely fine. Whatever you can give, we're grateful for. But if you can't do it, understandable. These are hard times, and no one is beholden. But if you want to check it out, you get episodes early of Rewind Review /Cora, and you also get some bonus stuff. One of which should already be up, which is us talking, going through some lyrics of songs. We've done break stuff by Limp Bizkit, and we've done the logical follow-up from that, which is To Become One by the Spice Girls. So you'll be able to hear those and some more, which we've got to record. I think if you're a big Cora person, like for sure, like the first episode of that will be out next week on the standard, like iTunes, Spotify, all that stuff, but it's out right now if you head over to the Patreon. So Rebel Spirit, episode 1 of season 2 of Cora, available on the Patreon right now for as little as $1 a month. It's a good deal. But of course, if you can't afford that, that's fine. You can support us in other ways. You can just tell a friend, like or subscribe on the YouTube channel. Give us a little review on one of the other platforms. Every platform has some sort of review system. They're different, but they're different but the same. Stars, hearts, thumbs ups, whatever it is. So you can support us by doing that, because that tells the algorithm you enjoyed this, and then that makes the algorithm more likely to recommend it to others. Or, of course, just keep listening. We appreciate that too. Yeah, absolutely. So there you go. That is all the stuff. My name is Chris Billingham.
My name's Dan Doolan.
And this review has been Rewound.